A voice comes out of the dark, not loud. It does not need to be. It comes from everywhere at once, from the inside of your own skull, the way a thought you did not think arrives already finished. Until the answer is found, death will not release you. Then an image, a tower, not a building. A wound in the sky. It rises out of a crowded, filthy, roaring city and keeps rising, past the clouds, past where the eye can hold it, until its peak vanishes into a haze of light so far above the world that looking at it too long makes something in your chest drop. They say there is a wish at the top, one wish, anything you want, made real for the one soul in a generation who climbs high enough to ask. They say the tower is 100 floors high. They say a lot of things. Nobody actually knows. No one has ever climbed high enough to come back and tell the truth of it. What nobody tells you is what the tower takes from you on the way up. That the climb reads you like a book, learns you, and turns every page you have against you. And nobody tells you what happens to the rare, broken thing the tower cannot read at all. This is the story of the day a nobody found out he was that thing. But on the night it begins, he does not know any of that yet. On the night it begins, he is just a tired kid at a bus stop, certain he is special, with 10 seconds left before the world proves him right in the cruelest way it can. Kale had imagined this moment before. Not this exact moment. Not the weak buzz of a late-night bus stop light flickering above him like it could not decide whether to keep working. Not the damp chill soaking through the jacket his mother had bought him 2 birthdays ago. The one he wore every day without once thinking about who had given it to him. Not the tired ache in his legs after another shift that had blurred into every other shift before it, but the idea of it, the impossible turn, the moment when an ordinary life cracked open and something extraordinary began. That was the kind of person Kale was. 20 years old, drifting harder than he would ever admit out loud. He had more unfinished plans than memories worth keeping, more hours logged reading fantasy novels at 3 in the morning than hours spent doing anything that mattered. His one steady thing was a part-time job at a delivery warehouse, sorting parcels, reading load sheets, deciding what went on which truck and in what order so the whole route did not collapse into chaos by the 3rd stop. It was mindless work that everyone else hated. Kale was quietly, uselessly good at it. He could look at a wall of boxes and a list of streets and see the shape of the whole day before it happened. He could tell which pallet was stacked wrong and going to fall before it fell. Nobody had ever once called that a talent. It was just the thing he did while he waited for his real life to start. He used to imagine what he would do if he woke up in another world. Not casually, seriously. He had strategies. He had priorities. He had entire conversations rehearsed with imaginary goddesses and demon kings built out of 1,000 novels, where the lonely nobody turned out to be the secret center of everything. He knew, with the absolute certainty of someone who had never once been tested, that he would rise to the occasion. His phone sat in his pocket with a text from his younger sister still unanswered. She had sent it 4 hours ago. Just 3 words. "Call me sometime." He had seen it, felt a small pang of something he did not want to examine, and let the screen go dark. He would reply tomorrow. He always told himself that. He never did. That was the truth the fantasy was built to hide. Kale did not actually do things. He imagined doing them. He rehearsed them, planned them, promised himself he would get to them tomorrow, and then he let the screen go dark. He had spent 20 years as the hero of a story he had never once worked up the nerve to start. Tomorrow was his whole religion. Tomorrow was the word he was going to choke on. That night, Kale stood alone at a nearly empty bus stop with his jacket half-zipped, his phone almost dead, and a head full of nothing that would survive the next 10 seconds. He blinked. The city was gone. The ground changed first. It was rougher, colder, uneven beneath his sneakers in a way that made his balance slip before his mind caught up. Then the air hit him. Thicker, older, carrying smells he had no name for. Smoke and stone, and something metallic underneath it all, like the taste of a coin held too long in a closed fist. The electric hum of his world was gone. No cars, no engines, no distant bass from a passing speaker. In its place came a sound so layered and chaotic it felt less like noise, and more like the breathing of something alive. Voices, hundreds of them, shouting, bargaining, cursing, praying. Wheels grinding over stone, metal striking metal somewhere far away, footsteps in every direction, heavy boots and bare feet, and things that did not sound entirely human. Kale turned in a full circle, breath caught halfway in his throat. He was standing in the middle of a crowded plaza, the size of a small city, stalls and tents and stone structures packed together in crooked rows. Merchants with scarred hands hauled crates of things he could not identify. Porters, bent double under loads that should have broken them, threaded through the crowd like they had been doing this since birth. Guards in mismatched armor shoved people aside without apology. Beggars sat in the gaps between buildings, missing limbs, missing eyes, watching the crowd move past them with the patience of people who had stopped expecting anything. And above all of it, rising from the center of the plaza, like the spine of the world itself, was the tower. Kale's mind went quiet. It was so vast that his eyes could not hold the whole of it at once. The base alone swallowed the horizon, a wall of dark stone so wide it felt less like a building and more like the edge of a continent turned vertical. Higher up, rings of pale stone wrapped around the structure in uneven bands. Black bridges crossed the empty air between sections. Ruins clung to the outer walls like the remains of civilizations that had tried to claim the tower and failed. And at the very top, impossibly far above, the tower's peak vanished into a haze of light and distance that made his stomach drop just from looking. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. And despite the confusion punching through every nerve in his body, despite the fact that he had no idea where he was, or how he had gotten here, or whether he was losing his mind, something dangerous rose under the fear. Excitement. Because it looked exactly like every story he had ever spent nights reading. The tower. The crowded gateway city at its base, the strange races and impossible weapons, and the promise that somewhere above, something worth reaching might be waiting. For a few reckless, shining seconds, Kale really believed this might be the beginning of the life he had always imagined. Then reality pushed back. People were looking at him, not for long, not with concern or curiosity or anything that resembled care, just quick glances at his clothes, his sneakers, his expression. A few slowed. Most ignored him completely. Whatever strange thing Kale was, this place had clearly seen stranger. That hit harder than he expected. If he had really been thrown into another world, then nobody here had been waiting for him. There was no guide, no quest marker, no wise old man with a mission. Just 1,000 people moving through their own problems, while a 20-year-old in a second-hand jacket stood in the middle of it all, looking exactly as lost as he was. For a moment, the panic nearly took him. He did not know where to go, or who to ask, or what he was even supposed to do. So, he did the only thing he had ever been good at. He started to look. A merchant clocked him at once. The clothes, the lost face, an easy mark. And leaned out of his stall, rattling off a pitch about charms that would keep a fresh climber alive on his first floor. Kale was already backing away when it hit him. He had understood every word. Not the way you understand a language you once studied. The man's mouth was making sounds that did not match the words landing in Kale's head, like a film running a half-second out of sync with its own dub. And the chalk scrawl on the merchant's board, the painted notices, the stamped letters on a passing climber's tag. Kale could read all of it. It was not his alphabet. It was nothing he had ever seen in his life. And he could read every stroke of it as easily as his own name. Whatever had pulled him into this world had at least left him that. He could understand it. He simply had no idea what it wanted from him. So he used it. He stopped waiting for a guide who was never coming and started reading the place the way he read a warehouse floor at the start of a shift. The current of the crowd, the signs, the way the newest and rawest and most lost-looking people like him, were all drifting in the same direction, pulled toward the base of the tower like water finding a drain. He followed them, and carved over a wide stone archway at the tower's foot, in letters he should not have been able to read and somehow could, was a single word. Registration. Nobody had told him to go there. Nobody in that whole roaring plaza had so much as slowed down for him. And that, the complete grinding indifference of it, 1,000 people who would not have noticed if he had simply stopped existing, should have been the warning. The registration hall was built into the base of the tower itself. Inside, the ceiling rose high enough to disappear into shadow, and the air was cooler, quieter, smelling of old stone and the faint metallic tang of whatever powered to the place. A long line of people waited in silence. One after another they stepped forward, placed a hand against a dark stone sphere mounted on a low pedestal, received a stamped tag in a thin sheet, and either moved on or were turned away. Kale stood in line and did what he always did. He watched, and he listened, and he started to build the rules of the game out of the pieces he could catch. It was not hard. People talked, and Kale had read enough stories built on exactly this shape to know which questions mattered. By the time he reached the front of the line, he understood the bones of it. The tower was the only thing in this world that mattered, and you climbed it. Every floor was a sealed trial, sometimes a monster, sometimes a maze, sometimes a thing nobody warned you about, and you did not pass to the next floor until you cleared the one you were on. Every 10th floor was a barrier, a true wall, far deadlier than the rest, the kind that stopped careers and ended bloodlines. They said the tower was 100 floors tall, with a single wish waiting at the top. They said it the way people say things they need to be true, because the honest answer, the one a porter muttered while he waited, was that nobody had ever climbed high enough to know. The furthest anyone had ever reached was the 40th barrier, and in all the long history of the climb, no living person had ever crossed it. And people themselves had ranks. The orb read you, and the registry sorted you, lowest to highest. Ash, stone, iron, silver, gold, and above those the near legends, saint and crown. Rank was not just strength, it was proof. Floors cleared, parties survived, a record the whole tower could trust. Ash was the bottom. Ash was the word they used for the ones who carried other people's weight and died without a report being filed. When his turn came, Kale pressed his hand to the cold surface of the orb and held his breath. Later, he would learn exactly what the orb did. That everyone in this world carried a thing the registry called a thread, a pattern woven through them that the tower could read like handwriting. Your thread was your shape. It told the orb your rank, told the monsters what you were, told the world how to weigh you, use you, and one day, how to finish you. The orb read 5 things off it. Force, what your body could do. Sense, what you could perceive. Channel, whether you could touch the tower's power, the thing the locals called magic. Will, whether you broke under pressure. And the thread itself, the rare, deep resonance underneath, the part that was closest to fate. He would learn all of that later. In the moment, he only saw the registrar stop. The man's flat, practiced voice ran out of words. He looked at the patterns shifting under the orb's surface. And then he looked again, and a small line appeared between his eyebrows, the look of a man checking a ledger that has stopped adding up. He recovered and read the result aloud in a tired monotone. Ash rank, low force, average sense, low channel, stable will. Then he hesitated and lowered his voice to keep the moment private. Your thread, he said, appears empty. Kale blinked. Empty? The registrar leaned in. He had seen weak threads, he said. Faint ones, threads so thin they barely turned the orb. In 20 years, he had never seen one that read as nothing at all. No affinity, no path, no shape the registry owned a heading for. It was not that the result was bad, it was that the result was blank, as if the orb had reached for Kale and closed on air. He stamped the tag anyway, because the registry stamped everything and slid it across without quite meeting Kale's eyes. Ash rank. Empty thread. To Kale in that moment, it landed as the most disappointing word in any language. No chosen sign, no hidden blessing, no impossible power sleeping in his blood. Just ash. The bottom, the floor beneath the floor. He walked back out into the plaza with a stamped tag in one hand and a hollow feeling spreading through his chest like cold water. The fantasy he had carried from the bus stop was dead. The world did not pause to notice. It kept moving around him, loud, indifferent, already certain he was nothing. He had no money, no name, no way back to wherever he had come from. He had not eaten since a world that no longer existed, and the cold was beginning to work its way into his bones. Whatever he had always imagined doing in a moment like this, the plans, the speeches, the version of himself that rose to the occasion, none of it came. There was only the simple animal arithmetic of a body that needed to eat and not die before morning. And in a city built around a single tower, there was exactly one kind of work that would take a man with no rank and an empty thread. Somewhere far above, the desperate whispered, there was a wish at the top. One wish, anything you wanted, for the one soul who climbed high enough to ask. Kale heard it and looked away from it, the way you look away from a thing you have not earned the right to want. He told himself he just had to get through the week. Then he went looking for work. At the bottom of the tower, there was only one place to look. The porter board was a scarred wooden wall near the tower's base, covered in nailed notices and chalk-marked requests. Most postings asked for stone rank or above, but at the bottom, scrawled on cheap paper, a handful asked for warm bodies to carry loads on floor 1 supply routes. No rank required, no experience needed. He was reading one of those when the crew found him. There were 4 of them, lean, rough-looking men with the kind of easy smiles that came from practice rather than warmth. Their leader, a man with a shaved head and a scar running from his ear to his jaw, looked Kale over once, and his eyes did not stop on the lost expression or the ash tag. They stopped on the clothes, the strange weave of the jacket, the stitching no tailor in this world had ever made, the shoes that did not look like shoes. Something flickered behind the man's smile, the quiet arithmetic of a person who has just seen money standing in the open. The man asked if Kale was looking for work. Kale said yes. Floor 1 was simple, the man said. Carry what you are told to carry. The pay is fair. Something in the back of Kale's mind whispered that this was too easy, that 4 men do not approach an ash-rank stranger and offer him kindness. It was the first time his habit of noticing things ever tried to save his life. A small, cold flag at the edge of his attention. He saw it, and he chose to ignore it. Because he was broke in 12 hours into a world that had already taken everything he thought he was, and because some buried part of him still believed he was special, that courage got rewarded, that when the test came, he would rise to it. He told himself he could handle 4 ordinary men. It was the most dangerous lie he had ever told himself, and he told it on purpose. He took the offer. Floor 1 was not a dungeon, it was a broken world. Ruined roads stretched into gray distance, cracked and buckled. Collapsed towers leaned against each other at angles that should not have held. Half-buried walls rose and fell across the landscape like the bones of something enormous that had died here long ago. The crew called the place the Root Expanse, loaded Kale down hard, and kept him at the edge of the group, close enough to use, far enough that the distance would look natural later. Then the road forked around a fallen pillar, and the crew stopped. The leader did not point him down a path this time. He held out his hand and asked, almost friendly, for the jacket. Kale did not understand at first. The man explained it patiently, the way you explain a thing to someone whose opinion does not matter. The clothes were worth more than Kale was, worth more than the whole haul. A collector 3 districts over would pay for cloth nobody in the world could make. So here was the deal. Kale would hand over the jacket, the shirt, the strange shoes, all of it, and the crew would let him walk back to the plaza alive, penniless and half-naked and breathing. A generous offer, the man said, for an ash-rank nobody who would not last the week regardless. And Kale, cold and outnumbered and afraid, believed that there was a deal to make. He took off the jacket his mother had given him and the rest and handed it over. The leader took the bundle, weighed it in his hands, and smiled. Then he and his men walked back the way they had come, not toward Kale, away from him, peeling off into the ruins with the unhurried ease of men who had done this a dozen times and knew exactly how many seconds they had before the screaming started. They left him there, stripped, unarmed, alone, on a dead route, because a witness in strange clothes was tidy or dead, and Floor 1 did the killing for free. The stones shifted under his bare feet 12 steps later. Dust burst from the wall. Something below the surface screamed, a sound like metal tearing through wet earth, and the ground cracked in a line that raced toward him. Kale ran. Not bravely, not cleverly at first, just the blind, scrambling run of a trapped animal. But as he ran, the other thing in him, the thing that read warehouse floors and falling pallets, would not shut off. It saw the creatures coming up out of the cracks behind him, 2 of them, fast. It saw that the broken road ahead funneled into a narrow gap between 2 leaning slabs of stone, a choke point barely wide enough for one body. It saw the slab on the left, the way it was already canted, already failing, held up by nothing but habit and a single shelf of rubble at its base. He did not have a weapon. He had a warehouse brain and 10 seconds. He ran the gap, squeezed through sideways, skin tearing on the stone, and the instant he was clear, he turned and kicked out the shelf of rubble at the base of the leaning slab with everything his terrified body had left. The slab came down, not on the creatures, he was not strong enough or lucky enough for that, but across the gap, sealing the narrow choke behind him in a roar of dust and grinding stone. On the far side, something heavy slammed into the new wall, once, twice, screaming. It did not come through. Kale did not stop to be proud of it. He ran, bleeding from a dozen places, lungs full of dust, deeper into a ruin he did not know, away from the screaming, until his legs gave out and he went down hard against a broken wall and could not make them work again. He heard the cracks behind him widening, more of them waking. He had bought himself few minutes. The expanse would take them back. That was when the arrow came. It cut through the dust an inch from his ear and dropped the thing that had been closing on him from the side, the one he had not seen, the one his warehouse brain had missed because it was already out of seconds. The creature hit the stone and did not move. A second arrow, a third, then silence. Kale looked up. She was standing on a rise of broken stone, about 30 feet above the path. Bow lowered, but still held ready, pale hair shifting in the gray light. An elf. That was the first thing his mind registered, with the dim wonder of a boy who had read about elves his whole life and never expected to see one bleeding him into focus. The wonder did not last. Her expression was flat, not concerned, not curious. Flat in the way of a person who has already taken in an entire situation, found it pathetic, and is deciding whether it is worth the effort of walking closer. She did not ask if he was hurt. She asked how he had managed to walk into something so obvious. Kale wanted to say something sharp. Instead, he coughed blood and dirt and gave her the only answer he had. First day? That got the smallest pause from her. Not sympathy. A brief, sharp reassessment, as if the answer had complicated a decision she had already made. Her eyes flicked to the sealed choke point behind him, the slab he had dropped, the rubble he had kicked out. For half a second, something that was almost interest moved across the flat surface of her face. Then, it was gone. She came down from the rise in a series of precise drops that made the ruined stone look like a staircase built for her. She told him to get up. He got up. She told him to leave whatever he was carrying, and almost laughed because he was carrying nothing at all. They had taken even that. And then she started walking, and Kale understood without being told that he was meant to follow. She said almost nothing on the way, but Kale, stumbling behind her, could not stop watching how she moved, feet finding stable ground on surfaces that looked exactly like the unstable ones beside them. Eyes tracking things in the distance he could not see. She did not slow down for him. She also did not leave him behind. He did not know what to make of that. When they reached the forward camp, a cluster of reinforced tents inside the shell of a collapsed tower, she delivered him to its edge, the way someone returns a lost piece of equipment. Functional. Complete. Not her problem anymore. She turned and walked back toward the expanse without looking at him once. Kale stood there, half naked and bleeding, watching the only person who had helped him disappear back into the ruins, as if she had already forgotten he existed. A porter at the nearest tent followed his gaze, then snorted and threw a spare work tunic at his chest. "Put that on before you scare someone." Kale pulled it on. Then, because she had given him nothing, not a name, not a word he could hold on to, he asked the porter who she was. The man looked at him like he'd asked who the sky was. "You really are fresh." He said her name then, the way you say the name of someone who is allowed to ignore you. Alindra. She runs scout lines for the Heroes expedition, the real one, the forward push. People like her do not come down this far for people like us. He shook his head. Crews like the one that took you have been getting bold, turning the route markers down here, steering fresh porters onto dead roads, feeding them to the expanse and stripping whatever's left. The road they dumped you on was a turned one. Yours was one of theirs. He spat into the dust. Thing is, robbing first days doesn't pay near enough to be worth the markers they're burning to do it. Whoever's running it wants those roads dead. For some reason nobody's worked out yet. That's what brought Alindra down this far, not you. You just happened to be lying where the answer was. Alindra. The hero's expedition. The forward push. Kale filed the words away the way he filed everything, without understanding yet what they would come to mean. He understood only that the woman who had stepped over the line to save an Ash-rank nobody had not done it out of kindness, and was not the sort of person whose name he had any right to know. He would learn how wrong he was about that. But not today. Someone pointed him toward the medical tent and told him to get the bleeding looked at before it attracted something. The tent was larger than he expected, lit by hanging lanterns that cast a warm amber glow across rows of cots. It smelled of herbs and clean cloth, and something sharp and medicinal underneath. A few cots were occupied, and kneeling beside one of them, hands on the wrist of a broad man whose left hand had been crushed to ruin, was a young woman. And Kale forgot for a moment that he was bleeding. It was not a decision. It was not even really a thought. It was the simple, total, embarrassing fact of looking at someone and feeling the floor of your stomach drop out the way it had when he first saw the tower. That same sense of standing in front of something his whole small life had not prepared him for. She was close to his age, dark hair pulled back, an expression so focused it looked like the rest of the world had stopped existing for her. Soft, golden light gathered beneath her palms, steady, unhurried, pulsing in rhythm with her breathing. He had read this scene 100 times in 100 books. He had never once believed it could happen to him. Love at first sight was a thing that happened to protagonists, and Kale had learned, very thoroughly, today, that he was not one. He stood in the entrance like an idiot and watched her work. She spoke to the crushed man without looking up. "Breathe with me, slower. I need you still for 10 more seconds." Her voice was calm in the way of someone who had done this so many times that her own steadiness had become a tool as reliable as the light in her hands. She counted down. The light intensified. The bones in the man's hand shifted and reset beneath the skin with a series of faint clicks that turned Kale's stomach, and the man gasped, then sobbed, then stared at fingers that moved again. She sat back, wiped her forehead with the back of her arm, and gave the man a tired smile that was real enough to reach her eyes. Then she turned and saw Kale in the entrance, the dust, the borrowed tunic, the blood at his shoulder, and was on her feet and guiding him to a cot before he could find a single word. "Sit." He sat. Her hands moved to his shoulder, and the golden light gathered, and the pain dulled, then faded, then went still. Kale realized, with a disorientation that had nothing to do with blood loss, that this was the first time anyone in this world had touched him without trying to use him. And then her hands went still, not finished. Still. The light beneath her palms guttered like a candle someone had breathed on. She frowned, adjusted her grip, tried again, and Kale felt the warmth gather and then slip somehow, like water refusing to hold a shape. "Hold on," she murmured, more to herself than to him. When she healed, she did not work blind. She read the body, the strain in the tissue, the place a bone wanted to break next, the thread running under the skin that told her what was failing and how. Every living thing had one. It was how she always knew where to push. She reached for Kale's the way she had reached for 10,000 others, and found nothing there. Her eyes lifted to his face. For just a second, the calm cracked, not into alarm, not quite into wonder, but into the specific stillness of an expert looking at something her expertise says should not exist, the same look the registrar had given the orb. "That's strange," she said softly, and seemed to decide the moment was too odd to trust. "Never mind, the wound's clean, you'll keep." But she left one hand on his shoulder a second longer than the work required, as if checking whether he was still there. She worked quietly after that, cleaning the worst of the cuts, wrapping a split in his palm. "Porter crew?" she asked. He nodded. Something flickered in her face. Not surprise, recognition. "They do this every season," she said quietly. "New faces, no connections, easy targets. The board does not screen them, nobody does. If you live through the first trip, you learn who to avoid. If you do not, no report gets filed." The tent flap moved. A broad man in a quartermaster's sash leaned in, took one look at the ash tag and the borrowed tunic, and made a small sound of disgust. "You are burning relief stock on a porter. He'll be dead in a week. Save it for climbers who earn the cash back. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She kept her hands where they were and said, without turning around, "Then put it on my ledger. Healer. My ledger. My stock. My call." She looked at him then, and the warmth Kale had seen a moment before was gone, replaced by something flat and immovable. "Every season your crews feed first days to floor 1, and every season I patch the ones who crawl back, and not once have you screened a single hiring board. So you do not get to stand in my tent and tell me which of them is worth a bandage. Out." The quartermaster weighed whether the fight was worth it. It was not. He left. She exhaled, and the immovable thing folded back into ordinary tiredness. "Sorry," she said, "not at you." Then a voice called from the entrance, not loud, just a name, her name. "Lyra!" She looked up, and something in her expression shifted, the professional calm softening into something warmer, something private. The tension left her shoulders. She stood, smoothing the front of her clothes in a small, unconscious gesture, and gave Kale a quick, slightly awkward smile. "Keep the bandage dry, and stay off the cheap postings." She stepped out through the tent flap, and just before it fell shut, Kale heard her voice change again on the other side of it. Lighter, easier, the voice of someone speaking to a person they have known a long time and never grown tired of. He did not see who was waiting for her. He told himself it did not matter. He was an ash-rank porter with an empty thread and a borrowed shirt, and she was the first warm thing in a cold world, and those two facts had nothing to do with each other and never would. But he filed away the change in her voice the way he filed away everything. Quietly, carefully, and he did not yet understand why it sat in his chest like a splinter. Her name was Lyra. It was the second name this world had given him, and the first one he wanted to keep. What followed did not happen quickly. Kale wanted it to. He wanted the story to accelerate, for the next chapter to arrive the way it did in the novels he used to read, where the nobody found his footing in a handful of pages and a training montage folded months into moments. But this was not a story. This was a life. And lives moved at the speed of endurance, not ambition. The climb that would have taken a chosen hero, a season took Kale years, and he earned every floor of it the slow way, the only way the bottom of the tower would let him. The first year, he simply survived. He found an honest crew, signed real contracts, and ran supply on floor 1 with the grim regularity of a man who had accepted that this was the only work an ash rank nobody could get. He was bad at the carrying. He was very good at everything around the carrying. He had been right that first day about the warehouse brain. It turned out that reading a wall of boxes and reading a wall of ruin were the same skill wearing different clothes. It showed the day a lead porter named Dara, a stone rank woman who had run floor 1 longer than Kale had been alive, turned left at a fork without slowing. Kale stopped. He had been studying the route markers obsessively since the crew left him to die, not because anyone told him to, but because he had learned what they were really for. The crews turned markers to make their dead roads. He had nearly died on a turned one. He swore he would never again be the man who could not tell a true marker from a false one. The marker at this fork was correct, but the scratch lines on its base stone angled wrong, the way a label angles wrong when a box has been restacked in a hurry. "That marker's been turned," Kale said. Dara gave him the look that said ash rank does not read markers, and turned left anyway. 30 meters on, the ground rang hollow under her boot, and she went very still and backed up. She did not thank him. But on the next run, he was moved off heavy carry and onto marker checking, the smallest promotion in the history of the tower, and the first time anyone with authority noticed that he saw things other people walked past. The second year, he started moving up, a floor at a time, the way the bottom of the tower let you, which was to say barely. A good marker reader was worth hiring, and word traveled. He ran support for larger crews, then for small parties willing to risk an unranked porter who somehow always knew which corridor was about to come down. He crossed the second floor, then the third, then the slow grind into the single digits, never as a climber, always as the man who carried the climbers' weight and quietly kept them alive. And every few months on the lower routes, he crossed paths with the elf. Alindra never went out of her way for him, But she was the one who had pulled him off a dead road on his first day, and she had a habit, when their paths overlapped, of saying exactly one useful thing and then leaving before he could thank her. Once, watching him inch across a collapsed ledge, with his eyes fixed on his feet, she said, without stopping, "You are watching the ground. Watch the walls. The ground lies. The walls remember." He did not understand it for weeks. Then, slowly, the walls began to talk to him. Erosion, load stress, the way a crack fanned out from the point of an impact, the way dust lay undisturbed in a corner that had not moved in a century. She taught him, in single sentences spread across a year, how to read a place the way she did, how to move through it without dying, how to be quiet. It was the first thing anyone in this world had ever chosen to give him, and she gave it like she was annoyed to be doing it. The third year was the one that changed him, because it was the year he stopped only watching and started becoming useful enough to keep. A mid-tier expedition pushing the floors above 20 took him on as a route analyst, a real title almost, for the porter who could look at a ruin and tell you which way it wanted to fall. It was on those floors that he met a veteran named Torin, a scarred, blunt man who checked his weapons 3 times before every rest and slept with one hand on his blade. The first night, when Kale asked why, Torin did not get defensive. He said he had once been the only survivor of a 9-man climb because his sword had jammed at the wrong moment, and he had decided that night never again to lose someone to a thing he could have checked. Then he looked at Kale, soft, unranked, useless in a fight, and made a decision of his own. He taught him. Not to be a swordsman, Kale would never be that. He taught him how to hold a blade so it would not be slapped out of his hand, how to take a hit and keep his feet, how to fall without breaking, how to make his soft body cost something to kill. "You are not going to win a fight up here," Torin told him, flat. "But I am tired of watching smart men die because nobody showed them how to lose slowly." For the first time, Kale could do more than run. Not much more, but more. And it was that third year that he made the choice that quietly decided everything. Mid-route, a wounded climber stumbled out of a side passage. Stone rank, arm broken so badly the bone pressed against the skin, moving the wrong way, deeper into the ruins instead of toward the surface. The crew's protocol was clear. Mark it. Report it at the next checkpoint. Keep moving. They were porters, not rescuers, and stopping cost time and pay. Kale waited. That was the part that mattered. He actually waited. The cost and the danger and the docked wages. The way the old Kale had weighed every plan he had ever talked himself out of starting. And then, for the first time in his life, he did the thing instead of promising to get to it later. He broke from the crew, guided the man to a shelter marker he had memorized 3 routes back, splinted the arm with the rough field medicine he had picked up watching healers work, and triggered the emergency signal before jogging back to a crew lead who docked his pay without a word. 2 days later, the climbers' party found their man alive. They filed a note. It did not call Kale a hero. It called him a porter who had gone off route to shelter a wounded stone rank climber. Reliable. Reads what others miss. Does not panic. The note traveled the way notes travel, up the chain of the expedition network until it reached the scout lines of the hero's forward push. And a flat-eyed elf who had, for years, been quietly keeping a tally on a certain low-rank porter read it, and added one more line to a list she had told no one she was keeping. By the end of that third year, Kale was something the bottom of the tower had no word for. The registry, reviewing his record, floors supported, climbers kept alive, the turned markers he had called before they killed anyone, did a thing it almost never did for a porter, and raised his rank to stone, not for power. His appraisal had not changed a hair, his force still low, his channel still nothing, his thread still reading as blank as the day he arrived, for record. As far as anyone could remember, he was the only stone rank in the tower whose orb read empty, a walking contradiction the registry filed and tried not to think about. Still weak. Still the man who carried the weight. But a porter the higher crews fought to hire, who could fight a little, move like a scout, read a ruin like a page, and had never once panicked when the wall came down. He had climbed into the 20s on a thread that read as nothing, and the years that followed only sharpened the strangeness of it. The 4th year and the 5th went the same, only higher and colder, Through the 20s, into the 30s, the slow, deadly grind toward the 40th barrier, the wall the whole climb had always died against. And somewhere in there, the registry reviewed him again and raised him once more. To iron, the third rank of 7. Unheard of for a man who had never once cleared a floor by his own strength. His orb still read empty, an iron rank porter with no thread, climbing higher than men whose threads burned like bonfires. People had started to whisper about him. He did not know what to do with being seen. He had wanted it his whole life, and it turned out to feel like standing in a draft. He had no idea it was about to get him killed. The elf found him at a porter's staging post on the edge of the expanse at the start of his 6th year. "The hero's expedition is going for the 40th, she said without preamble. "The barrier, the wall the climb has died against since before any of us were born. They mean to be the ones who finally open it." She let that sit, then explained the rest the way she explained everything. Flatly, as fact. The marker he had called turned before a lead walked onto it, the climber he had sheltered, a dozen small notes that all said the same thing in different words. "Rank I can find anywhere," she said. "I have 100 gold ranks who will throw themselves at that wall and die the same way as everyone before them. But the 40th has never been killed by strength. For 1,000 years it has killed minds, the ones who could almost read a thing nobody had read before and died one step short. That is the single thing the forward team does not have, and it is the only thing you have ever been." She held out an assignment sheet. "I gave them your name. Do not make me regret it." The boy who had stood at a bus stop dreaming of another world would have wept with joy. The man who took the sheet, scarred, lean, 6 years harder, only felt the cold. He was terrified. An iron rank porter who could not cast and could barely fight had no business on the deadliest floors in the world. But the climb was the only thing that had ever given a nobody a place, and up was the only direction that had ever pointed anywhere. And somewhere far above all of it sat a wish he had spent 6 years not letting himself want out loud, the faint, stubborn flicker from his first day that even now had not died. This was the fast way toward it. It would almost certainly kill him. He signed the sheet before the fear could talk him out of it. The way he had finally, over 6 hard years, taught himself to do the thing instead of promising to get to it tomorrow. And he went to find the forward team. The expedition was the largest group Kale had ever moved with. Near 24 people, outer scouts, a shell of heavy fighters, support casters, porters, all of it built to hold a stage line of camps up the dangerous floors. But at the sharp tip of it, the small unit that actually walked into the trials and broke the path open was the forward team. 7, once Kale joined. He had spent his whole life reading about parties like this one, the Fellowship, the Chosen Few, the bright band climbing toward the top of the world, bound by destiny and trading words of weight around a fire. What he found on his first night in their camp was 7 exhausted people arguing for 20 minutes about whose turn it was to boil the water. The best climbers alive? The public hope of a civilization, squabbling over a card game on a dead floor in the dark. Kale sat at the edge of the firelight, where a porter sits, and watched the thing he had climbed 6 years to reach turn out to be, of all the impossible things, just people. He had loved them before he understood that. He learned them the slow way, over the better part of a year. The way you learn the names of people who do not expect to learn yours. And the more ordinary they turned out to be, the more he found he could not stop caring whether they lived. He already had Torin. The veteran had been folded into the forward team a year before, and greeted Kale's arrival with a grunt that was, for Torin, a warm welcome. And he already had the elf. Alindra ran the forward team's scout lines, which meant she was rarely in camp and never quite in it. Out ahead in the dark, reading the floors before anyone set foot on them. The same flat-eyed work she had been doing the day she pulled a bleeding first day off a dead road, 6 years and a lifetime ago. She had spent those 6 years saying as little to him as a person could, and still somehow teach him how to stay alive. And she had just staked her own name on his to the most important expedition in the world. When he tried to thank her for it, she looked at him the way she looked at ground she did not trust, said only, "Thank me at the top, or not at all," and went back out into the dark. He still could not read her. 6 years on, that had stopped bothering him and started to feel like the one fixed point he had in this world. The mage was named Marin. Kale had never seen real magic worked up close until he watched Marin raise a ward of pale light to hold back a collapsing gallery while the team crossed under it, one hand flat on the grimoire chained to his belt, the other writing shapes in the air that Kale's eyes could almost, not quite, follow. Marin cast wards, mending light for wounds Lyra was too far to reach, a lance of force that cracked stone. And between castings he muttered about ruin patterns and old construction, the way other men muttered about the weather, because under the spellwork he was, helplessly, a scholar. He was also the first of them to talk to Kale like a colleague, because Kale was the first porter who had ever answered one of his questions correctly. Over the floors that followed, Marin taught Kale the thing Kale wanted most and could least have, the theory of it. How channel worked, how a thread caught the tower's power and shaped it. Kale learned it better than half the casters on the expedition. The patterns, the logic, the rules, and every time he tried to make even a flicker of it happen in his own hands, nothing came. The thread that read as empty had nothing to channel. Marin never said it unkindly, but they both understood it. Kale could learn the entire song and would never be able to sing a note of it. The rival was a gold-rank fighter named Resh, who looked at the iron tag on a man who could not throw a punch and said, loud enough for everyone, "If you slow us down, I will leave you behind myself." Kale said nothing. He had been left behind before, but over the floors he learned that Resh's cruelty was not really cruelty. It was fear wearing a louder face. Resh had clawed up from nothing and treated every weak link as a threat because he remembered exactly how it felt to be one. He sparred Kale brutally, every rest stop, ostensibly to toughen the porter so he would not get them killed, and twice Kale caught him quietly checking the rear of the formation to be sure no one had actually fallen behind. Neither of them ever mentioned it. And at the center of them was the hero. Kale had heard the name in Root Plaza the way everyone had. Arin Vale, the chosen hero, the man with the thread of ascent, the brightest in the tower, who carried the hope of a civilization on his shoulders like just another piece of gear. Seeing him was different from hearing about him. Arin did not look like a legend. He looked tired, his armor scratched and dented, his face closed with the weight of decisions made for too long. He led by standing still. Early on, crossing a hostile gallery, a young climber near the back stumbled, barely iron rank, the weakest in the line. Arin stopped walking, and because he stopped, the whole column stopped. 24 of the best climbers in the world halted in the middle of a killing floor, waiting without a word until the boy found his feet. Then he walked on, and they followed, and not one of them thought it strange. That was the day Kale understood the difference between power and leadership. The expedition did not race the frontier, it crept. Take a floor, make camp, push, fall back when a floor would not give. And somewhere in those long, cold months, the team that had taken Kale on as a tool, without anyone ever quite deciding to, began treating him as one of their own. Not an equal, not a fighter. The man who read the walls and noticed the things the bright and the strong walked straight past. When Marin finally asked how a porter with an empty thread had flagged a sealed passage from nothing but a dust pattern, Kale only shrugged. Nobody told me I wasn't supposed to be able to. The only thing he could not read his way around was Lyra. She was the forward team's healer, and the one thread in the world she could not read was his, so she could not tend him by feel. She had to ask him where it hurt, like an ordinary person, and somewhere in all that, asking they became friends. He fell the rest of the way and never said a word. One night by the fire, he watched her tend a small cut Arin had not bothered to mention, watched the way Arin went still under her hands and did not pull away, and understood the whole of it in a second. The first warm thing he had found in a cold world had, all along, belonged to the brightest man in the tower. He was the porter who noticed things. Of course he had noticed this last. And so it went. Floor by floor, month after month, up into the high 30s, the 38th, the 39th, each one stranger and quieter and more wrong than the last. By the time they stood at the top of the 39th, almost a year had passed, and the 7 of them had become something Kale had no word for. People who had each, more than once, been the only reason the others were still breathing. And then the last stair ended, and they reached the foot of the 40th barrier, where the climb ran out of floors that anyone had ever passed. For as long as anyone had kept records, the climb had ended here. Not because the 40th was the top. Nobody knew where the top was. But to go higher, you had to pass it, and in all the long history of the tower, no expedition ever had. The approach told the truth of the place before they reached it. Stone melted and rounded soft by some ancient heat. And the dead, armor and weapons and bones, expedition upon expedition, some so old they had gone to powder. Every one of them stopped at exactly this point and gone no further. This time, no one held the line below. Whatever waded past the barrier, they would meet it with everyone they had. Near 24 climbers, the whole expedition, the most anyone had ever brought this high. Arin gave the order. They went in together. The hall beyond the final door was so vast that calling it a room felt like a lie. The ceiling faded into a false dark sky hundreds of meters up, and it was empty. That was the first wrong thing. Outside, the approach had been a graveyard, 1,000 years of the dead, stacked where they fell. In here there was nothing. No bones, no rusted armor, no mark at all of the countless people who had died, in a place that killed everyone who ever entered it. The floor was clean and bare and waiting, as if the hall swept itself out after every meal. There were only the statues, 4 of them, vast, armored, spaced down the length of the floor, figures of no god or king anyone knew, faces worn smooth, hands empty. And at the far end, alone, facing the length of the hall, one more, far larger than the 4, and wrong in a way the eye refused to hold. Too many angles in the shape of it, a face that was almost a face. The 4 looked like they were standing guard. The big one looked like it was waiting. Marin walked to the near wall, the grimoire hanging useless in his hand. Kale had never seen him helpless before. The wall was covered, floor to ceiling, in markings. Generations of the greatest minds the tower ever produced have stood at this wall, he said quietly. Cartographers, spell readers, a saint once. Every one of them died carrying home a copy no living soul could read. It is not a language, there is no key. There has never been a key. We were not sent to open the 40th. We were sent to be remembered for trying. Marin was still saying it could not be read when Kale read it. He said it low, almost to himself, standing at the mage's shoulder. Do not be counted among the living, and it will not count you among the taken. No emphasis, no wonder, the flat voice of a man reading a load sheet. Marin turned and stared at him. Kale did not look back. He was still looking at the wall, head tilted, the marks having come apart into sense the moment he stopped trying to make them a language and simply looked the same way a load sheet came apart, the same way a floor did. He had just read, without effort, and without seeming to notice it was a miracle, the one line 1,000 years of saints had died, failing to read. How? Marin breathed. Nobody told me I wasn't supposed to be able to, Kale said. It was almost the truth, but reading it was not the same as understanding it, and for a moment he didn't. A scholar would have called the line a paradox, a test of faith, and drowned in it. Then, somewhere under the fear, a much stupider memory surfaced. A game. A dead world game children play in the dark. You drop to the floor and go still, stiller than sleeping, while the one who is it walks among you, hunting for the smallest twitch. Move, and you are out. Make yourself into nothing at all, and it passes you by like you were never in the room. He had always been good at that game. It was, in both worlds, the only thing he had ever truly been good at. Do not be counted among the living. Play dead. Don't move. Don't look. Be nothing. And it does not see you. He did not say it to the others. Standing out was the one thing the wall told him not to do, and something older than the wall agreed. He did not want 24 faces turning to look at him, not here, not anywhere. So he told only Marin, low and fast, heads down, eyes on the floor, do not look at the one at the far end no matter what. Make yourself small and walk. Marin's face did something complicated. Then the mage, who had the authority Kale would never have and never wanted, turned and passed it down the line in a voice that did not shake. Heads down, eyes down, do not look up. Whatever you hear, whatever you feel it doing, in here you are nothing. Be nothing, and it lets you pass. So, the greatest climbers alive lowered their eyes and bowed their heads and began to walk the long, empty hall like a line of penitents. 24 of the proudest people in the world, made small, filing past the silent guardians behind a porter with an empty thread who kept his gaze on his own feet and never once looked up. It was worse than any fight. Nothing chased them. Nothing roared. There was only the hall and the statues at the edges of their downturned vision, and the growing, skin-crawling certainty that the huge one at the end was closer than it had been, though no one dared look to check. Kale walked and counted his own steps and did not look. Behind him, he could hear people breathing wrong, the small animal panic of men who had never once in their lives survived by being humble. Halfway across, one of them broke. A big silver rank near the middle of the line, a man whose whole self was built on being looked at, on being feared, could not do it, could not walk bent and blind through a room in front of everyone he knew. He lifted his head just once and squared his shoulders and looked the thing at the end of the hall dead in the eye, the way a strong man faces a threat. The nearest statue moved. Kale felt the wind of it more than saw it. One impossibly fast motion at the edge of the line, stone that had stood still for 1,000 years, and then stillness again. When it was over, the man was simply gone, and the statue stood exactly where it had always stood, and the only sound in the whole vast hall was 24 people not screaming. "Eyes down," Kale said, quiet and absolutely level, not turning around. "Nobody look, we keep walking." And somehow, they did. They reached the far end a step at a time, past the foot of the great wrong statue, and Kale's downturned eyes found the line where the killing floor stopped and clean, unmarked stone began. He stepped onto it. Nothing happened. One by one, the whole expedition crowded onto the safe ground behind him and stopped and breathed and did not die. They had crossed, first in 1,000 years. Someone let out a sound that was half a sob. Lyra's hand found the back of Kale's shoulder. Relief moved through the line like heat. And then, at the head of the hall, the great statue opened its eyes. Not a trick of the light. Eyes, where there had been carved stone, opened and moved and found them. Somebody whispered it, the words running the line in a rush of ice. "It's looking at us. It's looking..." When it spoke, it did not roar. That was the worst of it. The voice was quiet and almost warm and unbearably pleased, the way you might praise a child. "So few," it said. "And still, the first in an age to arrive with your heads bowed. Worthy, truly." At the far end of the hall, past the statue, a door Kale had not even seen ground open, and beyond it, blackness and cold air moving, and up. The way up. The thing every one of the dead behind them had died dreaming of. "Come," said the statue gently. "The way is open for the one who leads." And Arin, who had carried this for 6 years, who went first into everything so his people would not have to, stepped toward the open door, to lead, to be sure it was safe before he waved the rest through. He crossed the threshold into the dark. The door slammed shut behind him. Stone met stone with a sound like the end of the world, and Arin Vale was on the far side of it, alone, and everyone else was still in the hall. "Ah," said the statue, and the quiet voice had changed. Not louder, only emptied of its warmth, the way a thing sets down a mask it was never truly wearing. No, passing was never the way out. Passing is how the tower learns which one to keep. It looked down at the 24 small bowed figures beneath it, and something in the not-quite face moved that might have been a smile. The rest is offering? And Kale understood, a half-second too late to matter. The thing no dead expedition had ever lived to learn. Playing dead had not been the way out. It had only been the toll, the way the hall sorted the humble from the proud and let the humble in. They had done everything right. They had bowed and stayed small and not looked, and crossed a floor that had killed 1,000 years of their betters. And none of it had ever been about surviving the floor. The floor was how you got in. Getting in was the trap. On the far side of the gate, Arin heard it begin. The panic went up all at once, 24 people understanding in the same breath that they were already dead. He never saw it. He only heard it. He threw himself back against the sealed door and drove his sword into the seam, and it rang off stone that would not so much as scar. And he hit it again and again, screaming their names, her name, sounds that stopped being words at all, hammering his whole broken body against a foot of rock, while everyone he had ever bled for died an arm's length away, close enough to hear and too far to reach. Marin, Elindra. And one long cry from Lyra that he would have known in any world, on any floor, at the end of anything. And then it stopped. All of it. At once, not fading, cut off, the way a sound is cut when there is no one left alive to make it. The sword slid out of Aaron's hands. He put his forehead against the stone and did not move, and the silence on the other side was the loudest thing he had ever heard. Inside, it was already over. They had not fought. There had been nothing to fight. Whatever the thing had done, it had done in a single breath, and now the great hall was full of people lying where they had stood, still and quiet, as if they had all at once decided to lie down. Near the sealed gate, Lyra had fallen with one hand stretched out toward the stone, toward the far side of it, toward Aaron, where she must have known to the last that he was. The fingers still reaching for a door that would never open again. And in the middle of all of it, Cale was still on his knees. He did not understand why. The force that had put 24 people down between one breath and the next had reached him too. He had felt it, a pressure like the whole weight of the hall coming down on his chest. And it had not finished him. It had passed through him, the way it passed through empty air, the way everything always had. He knelt in the wreckage of everyone he had ever mattered to, and could not make himself fall, and could not make himself look away, and kept his eyes open by the last thread of whatever he was, because it seemed obscene to be the one who survived by looking away. The great statue's gaze moved across the fallen, slow, certain, counting, and it reached the one small figure still upright in the middle of the room, the porter, the empty thread, the nothing that should have been the easiest of all to take. And it stopped. For a long moment it simply regarded him, this thing that had unmade 1,000 years of the strongest people alive. The way you might regard a single word in a language you were certain you had already finished learning. Then, slowly, it reached for him and stopped. The great hand drew back, the way a hand draws back from something it has touched and cannot hold, cannot grip, cannot find the edges of. And Cale's eyes closed, then the dark, and the silence that came after. Darkness. Not the darkness of a room with the lights off. The darkness of a place where light had never existed. And out of that dark came a voice. It did not come from any direction. It came from everywhere at once, from somewhere deep inside his own chest. Until the answer is found, death will not release you. And then, suddenly, Cale's eyes snapped open. He lurched forward, gasping, his boots scraping across rough stone. Wind slammed into his face. Noise crashed over him from every side. 100 voices, wheels rattling over cobble. The roar of a city that had no idea he had ever died. He knew this place. Root Plaza, the same crowd, the same tower, the same long shadow lying across the same stone. Exactly the way it had looked on the very first day he arrived. His body was whole, no wounds, no blood. His mother's jacket sat on his shoulders again, as if none of it had ever happened. He was alive, somehow, impossibly, back at the very beginning. And as the crowd streamed past him without a single glance, everyone breathing, everyone untouched, everyone exactly where they had been, the truth of it settled over him. And slowly, the horror of that truth crept across his face. He checked himself anyway. He could see he was whole. He checked anyway. He put a hand on his chest, where the thing in the hall had pressed down on him, and then stopped. Nothing there. He pulled up his shirt and looked at his side. A ceiling had come down on him on the 31st floor and opened him from the hip to the ribs, and Lyra had spent 40 minutes closing it, and he had carried the scar since. The skin was clean, his knee bent properly, his ear was whole. 6 years of injuries, and not one of them was on him. Then he turned his hands over. They were soft. He had built those hands out of 6 years of rope and stone, and out of 4 years of Torin standing over him at every rest, making him hold a blade until his grip failed. Now, they were the hands of a kid who unloaded trucks. And he was wearing his mother's jacket. He put his hands in the pockets, the lining, the small tear near the right one. 4 men had taken this off him on a dead road on floor 1 and left him to die. And it had been gone for 6 years, and it was warm. Cale stood in the middle of Root Plaza, holding his own sleeves, and started to shake. Then the memories came. Aaron stopping the whole column for a boy who stumbled. Lyra's hands over his shoulder on the first day. Elindra saying, "The ground lies, the walls remember." Torin checking his blade 3 times before sleep. Resh checking the back of the formation to make sure nobody had fallen behind, and never once admitting it. 6 years of work and blood, and finally being somebody in a room full of people worth knowing. All of it gone. Not lost. It had not happened. The grief hit him hard enough that he had to put his back against a wall and sit down on the ground. He stayed there shaking, and the crowd walked around him because Root Plaza had seen broken men before. He was not thinking clearly. He would tell himself later that he had been. He hadn't. It's a dream. He had never had a dream with a smell. They're alive. None of it happened. But he could still hear the sound his own knees had made on that floor. I've gone mad. He stayed on that one a while, because it was the easiest. And underneath all of it was the thing he had been avoiding since he opened his eyes. He had heard something, in the dark, after. It came back to him whole, and it was not his own voice. Until the answer is found, death will not release you. He had heard it once before, in the half second before a bus stop turned into a plaza, and he had been so busy being handed a new world that he had barely listened. He had taken it for scenery, the line the narrator says at the start. It had not been scenery, it had been the terms. He said it out loud, and somewhere in the middle of saying it, he arrived at a word. Regression. He knew this. That was the strange part. He could not have explained one single thing that had happened to him, and he still had a word for it, because he had read this exact story 400 times at 3 in the morning in a life that did not exist anymore. The hero dies. The hero opens his eyes at the start. Everything he learned comes back with him. And right behind that, before he could stop it, is this mine? 6 years of an empty page where everyone else had a thread. He had decided a long time ago that it meant nothing, that it was a defect, the reason he would always be carrying somebody else's bag. What if it had never been nothing? He wanted that to be true so badly that he made himself stop and put both hands over his face. He had felt this before. He had felt it on his first morning in this world, standing under the tower, completely certain that he had been chosen. 11 hours later, he was naked on a dead road because he had wanted a story more than he had wanted to pay attention. So he did not decide anything. He got up and went back to the spot where he had arrived. It was 40 paces away. He had not moved far. He had gone down against the first wall his legs had found. The stall was where it had been. The same crates, the same crooked awning, the same man behind it. Kale stood in front of him and waited. It took about 4 seconds. The merchant's eyes came off the crowd, found the strange weave of the jacket and the lost face above it, and he leaned out over his crates and started talking. Charms blessed and proven, the kind that keep a fresh climber alive on his first floor, and Kale said it with him. Every word. The same order, the same rhythm, the same little pause before the price so the number would sound like a favor. Kale's mouth moved half a beat ahead of the man's the whole way through, because he had heard this once before, on the worst morning of his life, standing in this exact spot with his heart in his throat. The merchant stopped talking and stared at him. Kale turned around and walked away, and his heart was going hard, and it was not grief this time, but it was not enough, and he knew it before he had crossed 2 rows. All he had proved was that the world was where he had left it, the same day, running the same way, the same man saying the same words in the same order. That was the world. It said nothing about him. There was exactly one thing in this world that could read a person, and it was 400 paces away with a queue in front of it. He stood in that queue for 40 minutes, and he was not calm. If the orb read him the same as last time, then nothing had touched him. 6 years had happened to a man who did not exist, and there was no proof of any of it anywhere in the world except inside his own head. He was not sure he could survive being the only evidence. He put his hand on the orb. Ash rank, low force, average sense, low channel, stable will. Word for word, in the flat voice of a man who had said it 11,000 times. Kale let his breath out. The same nothing. Then, the registrar stopped. It was not the small frown Kale remembered. The man leaned down over the orb and tilted his head, like someone who has picked up a page he has read 1,000 times and found a word on it that was not there yesterday. "Your thread is empty," he said. "I know. No, it's empty, and there's a mark on it." "Look," the registrar said, and turned the pedestal a few degrees so the orb faced Kale as well, which was not something they did, and which he seemed to realize halfway through doing it, and did anyway. He needed somebody else in the room to be seeing it too. Kale looked into the stone. The 5 readings were there, shifting slowly under the surface the way they always had, and in the part of it that had always been blank. The wide, empty place where a thread's shape should have been written, where Kale's had shown nothing at all on the first day of his life in this world. There was one short stroke, scratched in, one short line, cut into a place where nothing had ever been written. "What is it?" said Kale. "On a climber, scarring." The registrar rubbed his mouth. "Threads take damage, go high enough, meet something big enough, and it leaves a notch. I've read men coming off the 30s carrying 3 or 4 of them. It's ordinary. There's a box for it on the form." "What does it mean?" "That something got hold of them and they walked away from it. That's all. It's not a wound and it's not a gift. It's just a mark where the shape of a man got bent." He gestured at the orb. "And there's a box for it because it goes on a thread. That's what a scar is. It's a mark on the shape of you." He looked up. "You don't have a shape. There's nothing in there for it to be a mark on." The registrar sat back off the pedestal. He had been doing this 20 years. Kale stood there and watched him try 3 or 4 separate times to put the thing in front of him into a category and fail and give up. "What happened to you?" Kyle opened his mouth. There was no version of it, not one. He could say that a statue on the 40th floor had killed 24 of the best climbers alive between one breath and the next, and had reached down for him afterwards and not been able to pick him up. He could say it very calmly, and the man would call for somebody, and by evening, Kale would be a story people told each other in the queue. "I don't know," he said. It was the closest thing to true he had. The registrar looked at him a while longer. Then he did what the registry always did, which was write it down and refuse to think about it. He filled out the thin sheet, stamped the tag, and slid both across the counter without quite meeting Kale's eyes. Exactly the way he had the first time. 6 years ago, this morning. Ash rank, empty thread. One mark, put down in a space on the form he had to draw himself, under no heading at all. Kyle took it and walked out into the light. Scarring. Something big enough. Something big enough had reached for him yesterday. He had watched it take 24 people apart without moving. And then it had come for him and pulled its hand back like a man pulling away from a fire. So, it was real. That was what the mark was. Not a power and not a gift. Proof. He was not mad. He had not invented 6 years. Every day of it had happened. And then the second part of it arrived, which took a little longer, and which he liked a great deal less. Somebody had written it down. The registrar had called it scarring, and on a climber, that is what it is. Damage, with a box for it on the form. But a scar has to sit on a thread, and Kale did not have one. Whatever had put that line on his empty page had not been bending the shape of him. There was no shape to bend. It had been keeping count. A stroke cut into a door frame. The way you mark a thing that has happened once, when you expect to be marking it again. He stopped walking in the middle of the plaza. One mark, one death. He stood in the middle of the plaza and let the thought get exactly that far, and then he stopped it. Because the next thing in the line was, "So, I get another one." He had no reason to believe that. He had one death and one mark, and one of anything is not a pattern. The last time he had let a story he liked stand in for a fact he did not have, 4 men had walked him onto a dead road and taken his clothes. So he decided to treat himself as a man with one life. It was the only version of this he had any evidence for. But it was one life with 6 years of the future inside it, and about that part he was certain. Although not one piece of it was his. That was the thing he did not stop to look at, standing there in the sun. He had not worked any of it out. He had been told. 6 years of standing at the edge of other people's conversations and carrying other people's bags, and every useful thing he owned had come out of somebody's mouth while they were tired or angry or talking to somebody else. A porter had thrown him a borrowed tunic on his first night in this world and told him what the turn markers were for, with no idea he was talking to the only man alive who would still remember it 6 years later. Dara had shown him what the base stone of an honest marker looked like. Alindra had told him to watch the walls. Marin had explained how the tower's power moved through a person, patiently, twice, because Kale was the only porter who had ever asked. He was carrying 6 years of other people's answers. He had never once had to be right on his own. He owned a jacket and a stamped tag and nothing else. So the first thing was money, and then food, and then work that was not carrying somebody else's load. He went to the porter board. It was the same scarred wooden wall, covered in nail notices and chalk. The first time he had stood in front of it, he had understood almost none of it. He had seen a wall of words with numbers beside them, and he had gone looking for the biggest number he was allowed to have. That was how 4 men had found him. Now he read it the way he used to read a load sheet at the warehouse, and the whole week came off that wall in about a minute. The same Eastern Hall had been posted 4 separate times, cut into 4 smaller jobs at 4 different rates. Nobody chops a job up like that unless nobody will take it whole. Something had happened out on that route, and whatever it was, nobody had written it down. A notice for the second gate had been chalked over an older one, and whoever did it had not wiped the old one off properly. 2 different rates for the same work, 3 days apart. The difference between them was going into somebody's pocket. A job asking for 4 men to clear fallen rubble at the foot of the expanse. It was the 3rd week of the season. Nothing should have come down yet. Something had, and the guild had decided to call it rubble rather than say out loud on a public board that something had come down further than it was supposed to. He read all of it and took none of it. And that was the difference between this morning and the last one. He was not looking for the biggest number anymore. He was looking for the job with nobody else's hands on it. He found it at the bottom, on cheap paper, where nobody was looking. 2 days surveying the old northern wall. Bad money. He took it off the nail because he had spent most of a year on the northern routes, and he knew exactly why nobody would touch it. The clerk was a heavy woman with ink on 3 fingers, and she did not look up. That one's cursed. 3 crews have dropped it. They get out there, the markers don't match the sheet, they turn around. I don't pay for turning around. The markers match, the map's wrong. She looked up. The ground under that wall moves, Kyle said. Every few years it sinks, and the wall sinks with it, about the width of a hand. The markers are still standing exactly where somebody put them. It's the map that's out of date, so a crew goes out, measures the first stretch, and gets a number that doesn't match what's written down. They decide somebody's been turning markers on them, and they come home. And nobody ever fixes the map, so the next crew makes the same mistake, and the one after that. The clerk did not say anything for a moment. "Pay me half now," he said, "and I'll bring it back redrawn. A survey nobody can finish is worth nothing to you. A survey with the right numbers on it, you can sell to every crew that goes north for the next 10 years. There was a pause. "How long have you been on the board?" "First day." She counted coins into his hand, which she did not do for first days, and wrote his name down in the part of the ledger where she kept the people worth calling back. Then he went to pick up the survey kit. It was 1 crate. He had carried worse than that every day for 6 years. Worse and uphill, and in thin air, on a knee that had not bent properly in years, keeping pace with an elf who did not slow down for anybody. He set his feet the way Torin had taught him, got both hands under the lip of it, and lifted. It came up about 4 inches. His arms started shaking straight away, not because the crate was heavy, because there was nothing in them. He got it up onto the counter in 2 goes, and then stood there breathing hard, and a porter walking past thought the young man looked insulted. 6 years of knowing exactly what to do, in a body that had never done any of it. So he stopped trying to be a man who could carry a crate and opened it instead. The guild had packed the same survey kit for 50 years and packed it for the strongest man they could imagine. 100 feet of measuring line, a plumb bob, chalk, 3 lamps and a jar of oil, a hammer for resetting markers, which he had no authority to reset, a bound book of blank sheets thick enough to stop an arrow, and a folded canvas for a tent he was not going to bother pitching. Kale took the line, the plumb, the chalk, 1 lamp, and 6 loose sheets. He left the rest of it sitting in the crate on the counter. The clerk watched him do it and did not say anything at all. They found him at the board, the same as they had the first time. 4 of them. Lean, rough men with easy smiles that came from practice rather than warmth. The one in front had a shaved head and a scar running from his ear to his jaw, and his eyes did what they had done 6 years ago. They went past Kale's face, past the ash tag, and stopped on his clothes. The strange weave of the jacket, the stitching no tailor in this world could make. "You looking for work?" Kale had not thought about this man in years. There had been worse things above floor 20 to think about. And a man who takes a coat off a boy stops being important once you have watched a wall come down on your friends. But he was close enough to smell now, and the smile was exactly right, and something small and ugly turned over in Kyle's chest anyway. The first time, Kyle had said yes. "No," he said. "Floor one's simple. You carry what you're told to carry. The pay's fair. I've got work." He did not look up from the board while he said it. He kept his voice ordinary and slightly bored, and he made himself into nothing at all, because that was the one thing this world had ever taught him for certain, and it had cost 24 lives on the 40th floor to teach it. When something is deciding who to take, do not be worth looking at. There was a short pause. Then, "Suit yourself." And that was all. The crew moved off down the board, already talking about something else. Kale let his breath out slowly. 6 years, and the worst thing that had ever happened to him had just cost him one word to walk around. He gathered the line and the chalk and the sheets up off the counter and left. Behind him, at the board, the scarred man had stopped talking. He was watching Coyle go, not his face, the jacket. Then he said something short to the man beside him, and the four of them turned back to the notices, and the board went on exactly as it had been. Buying the supplies was the part of the morning he enjoyed most. He knew exactly what to get. He did not have to stop and think about a single item of it. 2 days of the flat, hard bread that does not spoil and does not need cooking. Dried meat from the stall that sold it by weight instead of the one that sold it by the piece. A water skin, filled at the public tap, and not bought full from the man at the gate, who charged 4 times as much for the same water. A blanket, thin, oiled on one side, and a canvas bag with a strap that crossed his chest, because a shoulder bag has to be held on and a chest strap does not. And by the second mile, that is the whole difference. None of it was clever. That was what he liked about it. It was simply 2 days of the expanse, packed by somebody who had done 6 years of them. And last, at a stall near the arch, a knife. Not a weapon, he had no illusions about that. In 6 years, not one problem had ever been solved by something Kale was holding. This was a short working blade, the kind a surveyor carries, for cutting line, for prizing a marker out of packed ground, and for the fact that the root expanse is a place where things come up out of the floor, and a man out there on his own should not be standing there with nothing in his hands. The stallholder tried to sell him a longer one. Kyle did not argue with him. He put the money for the short one down on the boards and waited, and after a moment, the man took it. Then he walked out through the north gate with the bag across his chest, and the noise of the plaza dropped away behind him, and for the first time since he had opened his eyes on that stone, he was not thinking about any of it. He had a job. He had money in his pocket, food on his back, and 4 miles of road he knew better than the people who had built it. It was, all told, the best morning he had ever had in this world. The old northern wall was 2 hours out of the plaza, along the edge of the root expanse, and nobody had worked it in 30 years. It had been a real route once. There were still cart ruts cut into the stone, and the stumps of a shelter where men used to sleep, and a line of survey markers running north for 4 miles, standing exactly where somebody had planted them a generation ago. Then the good ground had shifted, and the traffic had moved east, and the northern wall had been left to itself. 2 days' walk of ruined road, with nothing living on it, and nobody on it either. Which was the whole reason the job paid badly, and the whole reason Kale wanted it. He walked the line properly. He found the first marker, set the bag down, and measured the stretch to the second one. And the number came up 9 feet short of what the map said it should be, exactly as he had known it would. He wrote the true number down and went on to the next one. It took him a day and a half. He slept in the shell of the old shelter, out of the wind, with the blanket oiled side down against the stone so the damp could not come up through it, and his jacket rolled under his head. That was why he had not bothered carrying the guild's tent. There was already a roof out here. Somebody had built it 80 years ago, and then everybody had forgotten it was there. He woke twice in the night with his heart going, certain he had heard a wall come down. But the work itself was good. That surprised him. It was the first thing since he opened his eyes on the plaza stone that had asked him for something he could actually give. Walk, look, measure, write it down. Do not guess. His hands were useless, and his legs gave out early, and none of that mattered, because the job was all in the part of him that had come back whole. Twice he caught himself about to say something out loud to somebody who was not there. By the second afternoon, he had 4 miles of corrected line in a neat hand and a map that was worth something. He rolled it up, put it inside his shirt where the rain would not reach it, and started back. He ate the last of the bread walking. He was tired in the good way, and his water was nearly gone, and he was already thinking about the clerk's face when he put the finished map down on her counter and asked her what else she had. The last mile before the gate ran through a stretch where the road narrowed between two collapsed faces of stone. He had walked it on the way out, without thinking about it. He walked it now the same way because he was 2 days into being alone and there had not been a living thing on that road in either direction. Behind him, somebody called out, cheerfully, the way you call out to a man you know across a crowded market. "There he is!" Cale turned round, and it was the same 4 men, and the same one out in front of them, smiling at him like the board had never happened. "Small world," he said. "You get about, don't you?" "Seems that way. We're on a haul out this way. Nothing much in it." He said it easily, the way you say a thing that is true. 2 days you've been out here? About that. And you finished it." The scarred man turned to the man beside him, delighted. 3 crews wouldn't touch that job. This one walks out on his own and does it in 2 days. I said he was useful, didn't I? Standing right there at the board, I said it. The man beside him agreed that he had. It was friendly. That was the thing about it. It stayed friendly the whole time. Cale answered pleasantly and kept his face easy, and underneath it he was reading the road the way he had read 1,000 roads, and the road was telling him things he did not like at all. 4 men on a haul, and not one of them carrying a rope, a crate, a hook, or a water skin. Nobody walks 2 hours out of the plaza for a load with nothing in his hands. The one on the left had drifted wide. He was not talking, and he was not looking at Coyle, and he had put himself out beyond the edge of the road, where a man goes when he means to end up behind you. And the scarred man kept his own hands out in front, where they could be seen, which is a thing a man does on purpose. So Cale started walking. Not away. That would have started it early. He kept talking and he kept his feet moving, drifting a step at a time towards the place where the road ran narrow between the 2 collapsed faces. Because if this went the way it was going to go, he wanted stone at his back and a gap in front of him wide enough for 1 man. He got about 8 steps. "Cold out here," the scarred man said. "That's a good jacket." "It is? I'd have that off you then." And he stepped back and to the side. That was all it was. No shout, no signal. Nothing anybody watching would have called an order. 1 man moving out of the way to let the men behind him through. Cale had spent 6 years learning to read exactly that much. He was already running for the gap. He got there first, and it was the only thing that went right all afternoon. He put his back against the stone, and the road stopped being 4 men wide. The first one came in swinging high and wide, the way a man swings when he is not expecting to be answered. Cale stepped inside the arc, where the elbow is and the power is not. Exactly the way Torin had made him do it 1,000 times, and drove his forearm into the man's throat. The technique was perfect. The man rocked back half a step, made a noise, and came straight back in, because there had been nothing behind it at all. That was the first thing Cale learned, 4 seconds in. Whatever happened here, he was not going to hurt anybody. So he stopped trying to. He was not a fighter and never had been. He was the man who looked at a ruin and said which way it wanted to fall. He stopped fighting the men and started using the ground. When the next one came and committed, Cale caught the wrist and did not pull. He pushed it the way it was already going, 4 degrees further than the man had meant to go, and put him shoulder first into the stone face. It was the best thing he did all day, and the man got up off the floor 8 seconds later with a torn ear and a bad temper. That was the second thing he learned. Nobody stays down. In 6 years of watching fighters, he had somehow never had to learn that people simply get up, over and over, and keep arriving. The third one swung a length of pipe at his head, and Kyle was not there. He was already crouched, because frightened men swing where a head is supposed to be, and 8 inches lower is the cheapest place to stand in any fight. And down there, on one knee, with the pipe going through the air above him, he remembered that he had bought a knife. He did not stab anybody with it. A knife in a weak hand is a gift to whoever takes it off you. He got it out and held it low and visible, and when the next hand came for the front of his shirt, he cut it across the knuckles. Small wound. It was enough. The man swore and jumped back, and for a moment, nobody wanted to be the one standing at the front of the gap. That was the high point. Cale was in a gap wide enough for 1 man, with 4 men in front of him, and none of them coming. It lasted about 40 seconds, because the trouble was not the fighting. It was that fighting is enormously expensive, and nobody tells you the price until you are paying it. His arms went first, and they did not go all at once. The first exchange, his hands were where he wanted them. By the fourth, his guard was coming back up an inch lower every time, and he could feel it happening and could not stop it. Then his breathing turned over into something that was not breathing, quick and shallow and never quite enough, and he found he was pulling air through a mouth that had gone completely dry. And then the gap between deciding and doing began to open. He saw the next punch early. He saw it perfectly. He knew exactly where to be, and he watched his own body arrive there a quarter of a second late and take it on the cheekbone instead of on nothing. Kale understood then, with a clarity that was almost restful, that he had read the whole thing correctly, and it was not going to matter. The men in front of him worked this out at about the same time, and they were not clever men, and they did not need to be. They stopped coming. That was the worst part of the whole afternoon, and it took no violence at all. 4 men who did this for a living simply stopped and stood in the road 3 feet outside a boy's reach and let him hold his knife up. One of them put his hands on his knees. One said something to another one about the time, and Kale stood in a gap he had chosen perfectly, with stone at his back exactly where he wanted it, waiting for men who had decided to wait for him instead. He lasted maybe a minute of it, and then his knife hand started to shake. It was not much of a shake. It did not have to be. 4 men standing 3 feet away watching a boy's hand saw it at the same moment he did. "Right," the scarred man said, and they all came at once. There was no technique left for 4 men arriving from 4 directions. Somebody caught the knife arm at the wrist and turned it until his fingers opened, and the knife went onto the road. Somebody else took his legs out. He went down under all of it, and his cheek hit the stone. He got up anyway. He took the ground with his shoulder instead of his skull, chin tucked, hands in, the way he had been taught. They put him down again. He got up again. He did that 3 times. The 4th time, a hand came down on the back of his neck and put him flat on the road, and he stayed there because there was nothing left to get up with. He stopped struggling too. Struggling would only have given them a reason. They did not need one. It was not a fight after that. Somebody knelt on his back. Somebody put a boot on his wrist and left it there. Somebody else worked on his ribs, unhurried, the way you break down a crate you want the wood out of. His ear opened. His eye began to close. He heard something go in his side and felt the breath stop coming properly after it. The scarred man crouched down on the road in front of his face and waited until Coyle turned his head far enough to see him. "You told me no," he said. There was no anger in it at all. "In front of my crew, on a public board, and then you walked out here on your own, where there's nobody, and you left us 2 days to think about it." Kale spat blood onto the stone and did not answer. "It's nothing personal. You understand that." The man reached out and took a handful of the jacket, working the weave between his fingers, the way you check cloth you already have a buyer for. "There's a man 3 districts over will pay for this." And then he stood up and told the others to get it off him and turned to go. And Kale, flat on a dead road with a knee in his back and a boot on his wrist, could not let him walk away. That was the whole of it. There was no plan in it. He was in more pain than he had ever been in, and 2 days ago, he had watched everyone he loved die in one breath and had buried none of them. And for 6 years, not one person in this world had ever once let him finish a sentence. "It doesn't pay," he said. The scarred man stopped. "Turning markers. It doesn't pay." Kale's voice came out wrong, thick and wet, and he kept going anyway. "You need men out there to move them. You need them to stay moved. And every road you kill is a road nobody takes anymore, which means nobody hires porters for it, which means nobody's carrying anything down it worth taking. You are spending more than you are making. You have been spending more than you are making for years." Nobody moved. So, it was never about coats. Kale turned his head on the stone until he could see the man's face properly. "You want those roads dead? Somebody's paying you to want it. And nobody in Root Plaza has ever worked out why." The road was very quiet. The scarred man came back and crouched down again, and this time his face had nothing easy on it at all. "Where?" he said. "Did you hear that?" The arrow went through his shoulder while he was still saying it. He went over sideways with a sound Coyle would remember for a long time. The second arrow went through the calf of the man standing on Kyle's wrist, and the boot came off him, and by then, all four of them were looking up at the rise above the road, where a pale-haired shape stood, with a third arrow already drawn, and no expression on her at all. Nobody ran for cover. There was no point in it, and they knew it. Two of them got the scarred man up under the arms, and the four of them went back into the dead ground fast and badly, the arrow still in him, leaving the bag where it lay, and the jacket where they had dropped it, and the boy on the road. Kale lay on his side and watched them go. The scarred man looked back once, over the shoulder that still worked, not at the elf, at Kyle. She came down off the rise in a series of precise drops that made the broken stone look like a staircase built for her, and something in Kale's chest let go before he could stop it. 6 years old, entirely unearned. She's here. It's fine now. She did not offer him a hand. She stood over him and looked at the road first, the narrow ground he had put his back into, and how much of it he had picked correctly. The blood on the stone that was not all his, and a short surveyor's knife lying where it had been turned out of his hand, with a little of somebody else's blood along the edge of it, which she looked at for a good deal longer than the rest. Then she said, "How long have you been working out here?" Kale threw a mouth that was not working properly. "What?" "It isn't a hard question." She crouched finely and turned his face toward the light with 2 fingers, checking his eye the way you check a lamp. "The expanse, the routes, the boards, the crews that work them. How long? 4 years? 6? 2 days. Her hand stopped. "Say that again." 2 days. I registered yesterday morning." She looked at him for a long moment, and Kale watched her do the thing that made her worth 600 fighters. Take a fact that fitted nowhere at all and refuse on principle to put it somewhere comfortable. "Then you can explain something to me," she said. "I have been chasing that crew for a year. I have stood in front of the guild 4 times and told them it is not robbery, and 4 times they have told me it is, because I cannot show them a reason for it, and they can. And a boy who has been on the boards for 2 days just described the whole of it out loud, on the ground, with a boot on his wrist." She waited. "I heard it somewhere." "Where?" "I don't remember." She looked at him for a moment with the flat, patient attention of somebody who has just been lied to and has decided to keep the lie for later. "Get up," she said. He got as far as one elbow and stopped there. She picked the jacket up off the stones, shook the dust out of it once, and held it out to him. Kale took it with the hand that still worked. He got it back onto his shoulders slowly, and he was careful with it, more careful than a man in that condition has any business being with a coat, and he did not say one word while he did it. Alindra watched that too. Then he put his hand inside his shirt, and the map was still in there, rolled, bent, and printed along one edge with his own blood. Finding it was the first thing all afternoon that made him want to laugh, and he could not, because of his ribs. He could not stand either, so she took his weight, which she had not done for him the first time, and would not have done now for most people. And they started the long walk back with his arm across her shoulders and his ribs grinding at every step. He passed out twice on the way. Both times he came round still moving, with her hand fisted in the back of his shirt, and she never mentioned it. At the edge of the forward camp, she handed him over to a porter, and then instead of turning around and going, she stood there a moment. "Alindra," she said. He had to work very hard to look like a man being told a name. "Kale. Get the ribs looked at, Kale, the tent with the lamps outside it." And she went back out into the expanse. She did not ask him again where he had heard it. Kale watched her go from where the porter had propped him against a crate. She had not let it go. She had put it away to come back to. The tent with the lamps outside it was easy to find. He would have found it anyway. He had been here before. The first time, on his first night in this world, he had stood at the edge of this camp in a borrowed tunic with blood drying on his shoulder, and a porter had told him what the turned markers were for. That crews moved them to steer fresh men onto dead roads, that they stripped whatever was left out there. That was all the man gave him, and it was where everything started. The rest of it, that killing a road costs more than the coats are ever worth, and that somebody has therefore been covering the difference for years. Kale had put together himself, slowly, over 6 years of checking markers for a living. He had never once said it out loud, not to anybody in 6 years. Then he had said all of it, this afternoon, face down on a road with a boot on his wrist, to the 4 men it belonged to. He got the flap open with his shoulder. She was inside, alone, counting bandages onto a shelf. That was all she was doing. The first time he ever saw Lyra, she was kneeling over a man with a crushed hand, golden light gathering under her palms, and it was the most extraordinary thing he had ever watched anyone do. Now she was tired, her sleeves pushed up, and her hair coming out of its tie, counting bandages, and she was alive. She turned round. The two of them looked at each other a moment longer than strangers do. Then she saw the state of him properly and stopped being anything except a healer. "Sit." He sat. She did not ask him what had happened. She got his shirt open, put both hands flat on his side, and closed her eyes, and Kale watched the light come up under her fingers and felt the warmth start to go into him. Then it guttered, like a candle somebody had breathed on. She frowned, moved her hands 3 inches and tried again, and the warmth gathered and slipped away, the way water slips off a shape it will not hold. "That's strange," she said. Kale said nothing. He knew what had just happened. To heal a man, she had to read the thread under his skin, feel what was failing and where to push. Kale had no thread to read. The first time, she had found the same nothing, decided it was too strange to be true, and moved on. She did not move on this time. He was too badly hurt for that. She sat back on her heels and looked at him with an expression he knew very well, an expert being shown something her expertise says should not exist. And then she put it away and simply got on with it. "All right," she said. "Then you're going to have to tell me. Where does it hurt?" "3rd rib on the left, maybe the 4th. "Show me." He showed her. She worked. The warmth went in properly this time, because now she knew where to send it, and it went in the way water goes into dry ground, slowly, and without any of the ease he remembered. "Breathe in until it stops you." He breathed in until it stopped him. Again. And so it went for the better part of an hour. She asked, and he answered, and she pushed the light in where he told her it was needed, and neither of them said anything about how strange it was, a healer working the way an ordinary person would have to, with her hands and her questions and nothing else. Kale had spent a year on the other end of this. She had never been able to feel what was wrong with him. So she had asked, on the 28th floor, on the 33rd, after a ceiling came down on him on the 31st, and somewhere in all that asking the two of them had become friends, and he had fallen in love with her, and he had never once said so. She had no idea. She was asking him for the first time. "You're not going to be much use for a while," she said eventually. "That rib's cracked, not broken, and I can't tell you which because I can't feel it, which I would like to say is unusual." She sat back. 2 weeks before you carry anything, and don't sleep flat." "I won't." "Everybody says that." She wiped her forehead with the back of her arm. "What were you doing out there on your own?" And there it was. It came up in his throat so fast it frightened him, because he could end all of it right here, the whole thing, this afternoon, on a cot, with 3 sentences. "In 6 years, there is going to be an expedition to the 40th. Everyone in this tent is going to be on it. Do not let Aaron Vale walk through that door first." He got as far as opening his mouth, and then he heard how it would sound. Not the words, the sound of them, said out loud in a medical tent by a boy with a cracked rib and a closed eye, 2 days off the registration line, who had just been beaten half to death on an empty road. She would not laugh at him. That was the thing. She would not even argue. She would keep her voice exactly as level as it was now, and she would finish the bandage, and she would tell him gently to lie down for a while. Oh, and then, on her way out, she would say something quiet to somebody about the surveyor who had taken a knock to the head. And that would be the end of it. Not of her, of him. Because the only thing Kale had in this world was that people believed him when he told them things, and the moment he became the boy who says the tower talks to him, nothing he ever said again would land anywhere. He would still know everything. Nobody would listen to a word of it. He was the only person alive who knew what was coming, and he had just worked out that he could never tell anybody, and that nobody was stopping him. He was going to do that himself, every single day, starting now. "Surveying," he said. "It's a 2-day job. On your own. It's a bad job. Nobody wanted it." She looked at him for a moment. "Well, somebody wanted something," she said, Stay off the empty routes. They watch the boards, whoever they are. They've been doing it for years, and nobody screens the postings. And if you don't come back, nobody files anything. Kale, who had heard the second half of that sentence before, said nothing at all. Then a voice came from outside the flap. Not loud, just a name. Lyra, and Kale's head came up. He knew that voice. He had heard it give an order on the 39th floor, with the ceiling coming apart. He had heard it stop a whole column on a killing floor for a boy who stumbled. He had heard it, last of all, through a foot of stone, screaming her name until it stopped being words. Lyra's face changed. Not much. The professional part of it went somewhere, and something warmer and more private came up underneath, and she stood and smoothed the front of her clothes with a small movement Kale did not think she knew she was making. "Keep it dry," she told him, "and I meant 2 weeks." She went out through the flap. Kale sat on the cot with his ribs strapped and listened to her voice change on the other side of the canvas. Lighter, easier, the voice of somebody talking to a person she has known a long time and never once got tired of. He did not get up and look. There was nothing on the other side of that canvas he needed to see. He sat there instead, in a tent full of lamps, and did the arithmetic he had been avoiding since she said the name. 6 years. They had 6 years. He stayed 4 days at the forward camp because he could not do anything else. They were not wasted days. He could not lift, so he made himself useful in the only way left to him. He sat where the porters ate and he listened, and every so often he said something short and correct. And by the 3rd day, 2 crew leads had come to find him, to ask about ground he had never officially seen. He was careful. He gave them nothing that could not be got from a good look at a map and a bad night's sleep. It was still more than either of them had. And on the 2nd day, lying on a cot with nothing to do but think, he worked out the thing he should have worked out on the road. He had refused the crew at the board, quietly giving them nothing, and he had walked away from it, believing that was the end of the matter, that he had said no, and no was an answer, and men take an answer and move on. It had never had anything to do with what he said. The scarred man had looked at the stitching on his sleeve and decided in about 4 seconds, standing at the board, before Kale opened his mouth at all. Everything after that was arrangements. Out here, the jacket was not his mother's. It was a reason for 4 men to walk 2 hours up a road behind him. So he folded it and wrapped it in the canvas he had never pitched and put it at the bottom of his bag. On the 5th day, he walked back to Root Plaza in a borrowed work tunic with somebody else's name inked in the collar, slowly stopping twice. The clerk with the ink on her fingers looked up when he came through the crowd, and she took in the eye and the way he was holding himself, and her mouth went thin. Kale put the map down on her counter. It was a mess. It was rolled and bent, and there was blood dried along one edge of it in a stripe the exact width of a rib. She flattened it out with both hands and did not say anything for a while. Then she turned it round and went down the northern line with one inked finger, marker by marker, all 4 miles. These are corrected. Every one. The fracture's under the 3rd and 4th. It'll move again in a few years, and when it does, the whole thing reads short again. So put the date on it. She looked up at him. Then she went to the back of her ledger and counted out the second half of his money, and then she counted out some more that was not his, and pushed the lot across. "What's that?" "That's for not turning around," she said. Kale picked it up. "Who did that to your face?" "A crew." "Which crew?" "I didn't get a name." She held his eye a moment too long, and Kale understood 2 things. She knew exactly which crew, and she had not been asking him who did it. She had been finding out whether he would say the name out loud in a public hall where anybody standing near the counter could hear him. "You'll want work you can do sitting down for a while," she said, and reached under the counter and put a folded sheet in front of him. "This came in for you, not for the board, for you." Kale unfolded it. It was 4 lines in a small, hard, entirely unhurried hand, and it did not say who it was from, and it did not need to. "You said somebody is paying them. Prove it to me. The Eastern Line, 2nd Gate, 1st Light. Bring the map you made. Say nothing at the board. They read it before you do." Kale read it twice. He could not prove any of it. That was the trouble. He knew somebody was paying that crew the way he knew the charm merchant's speech, word for word, out of 6 years of walking those roads in a life this world had no record of. She was not asking him what he knew. She was asking him to put something on a table. "When did this come in?" "Last night." First light was 9 hours away. The eastern gate was on the other side of the plaza. He had a rib he could feel when he breathed, and he had been told twice, firmly, not to carry anything for 2 weeks. He folded the sheet and put it inside his shirt, where the map had been. She was at the second gate before he was, and she had been there a while. "You're carrying nothing," she said. "I was told not to." "Good." That was the whole of the greeting. She looked at him for about 2 seconds, at how he was standing and which side he was keeping his arm against. And then she turned and started walking, and did not ask him about it once for the next 3 weeks. The eastern line was a working road. That was the first thing that made it different from the north. There were crews on it and carts and a guard post at the second gate with 2 bored men in it, and none of them looked twice at an elf and a boy with a closed eye walking out at first light. They found the first turned marker 2 miles out. Kale found it, and he found it in about 4 minutes, and he had to be careful about how he explained why. "That one," he said. "It's standing where it should stand." "It is. Look at the base." She crouched. He got down beside her, slower, and put a finger on the stone at the foot of the marker, where a set of shallow scratch lines ran across it. They cut those when they set it, to true it up, so the lines run square to the road. He turned his hand. "Those are 4 degrees off. It's been out of the ground and put back." Alindra looked at the scratches for a long moment. "Who taught you that?" Kale kept his eyes on the stone. "I shifted crates for a living," he said. "You can tell when one's been put back. It never goes back the same way round." It was true, and it answered nothing, and she let it go. The real answer was a lead porter called Dara, who was out on floor 1 that morning hauling supply for somebody, and who had not met him yet. They found 6 more markers that day. She wanted a name. That was the thing he understood about her in the first week. She was not looking for a crew, she had the crew. She had had them for a year. She wanted whoever was above them, and she wanted him standing in front of the guild with his mouth open. Kale told her she was never going to get one. They were sitting in the lee of a broken wall eating, and he said it plainly because he had thought about very little else since the road. "You won't find a paymaster. Nobody writes that down. But you don't need him." He put a piece of bread on the stone between them. "You need the sum. Say it properly. Start with what it costs them. A guild marker is cut stone. Somebody quarries it, somebody dresses it, somebody carts it out, and 2 men set it with a level. That is real money before anybody has done anything wrong with it." He put a piece of bread down on the stone between them. "Now count. That crew has moved 40 of them that we know about, across 2 seasons. Every one of those is 4 men out in the expanse for a day, doing work they cannot be seen doing." He put a second piece of bread down, further off. "And here's what they take. A coat, a pair of boots, somebody's knife. On a good day, a purse with a week's pay in it." He looked up at her. 40 markers against 40 coats. It isn't close. It has never once been close. Alindra looked at the 2 pieces of bread for a moment. "So somebody is covering the difference. Somebody has been covering it for 2 years. You don't need his name to prove he exists. You only have to show that he has to." Alindra did not say anything for a while. "I have stood in front of the guild 4 times, she said. "You told them it isn't robbery." "It isn't." "That's an opinion. They've got one too, and theirs is cheaper." Kale ate the bread. "Show them arithmetic instead." She looked out at the road for a moment. "How old are you?" 20. Said Alindra. The weeks after that were the best time Kale had in that life, and he did not notice it while it was happening, which is generally the way. He could not keep up with her. That never changed. She moved over broken ground the way other people walk down a corridor, and by the 3rd mile his legs were gone and his ribs were talking to him, and she would stop at some point ahead and stand looking at nothing in particular until he arrived, and then start walking again without a word. She never once said she was waiting. He never once said thank you. He learned the work. She read ground, tracks, disturbed dust, which way a thing had been dragged. He read structures. Between them they emptied a road of its secrets in about half a day. He learned her arrows too, because she made him carry them one afternoon when her hands were full, and he counted them into the quiver and found every shaft cut with the same mark below the fletching, 3 short strokes burned in. "So you know which are yours? So I know which are mine when they come back out of something. Does that happen?" Once, she took the quiver off him. The man kept the arrow. I would have liked it back. Twice in those weeks, he got as far as opening his mouth. The first time she said something flat and correct about a wall, and he nearly said, "I know, you told me," and stopped it behind his teeth. The second time was worse. They were walking back at dusk, and she asked him, without any particular interest, whether he had family anywhere, and Cale thought about a sister 400 paces and one entire world away, and about a text message he had never answered, and about a woman with golden light in her hands who was going to die on the 40th floor in 6 years' time with her hand out towards a door. "No," he said, "nobody." He got better at it. That was the part he liked least. By the end of the second week, the lie came out smooth and easy, and he heard how smooth it was, and he understood that this was going to be the shape of the rest of his life. The drawing was his idea, and he would think about that afterwards more than anything else. He did it at the clerk's counter in the guild hall, late, on the good paper she kept for survey work. He put the corrected northern line on it first, then the eastern line, then the 4 dead roads, the ones the crew had killed, the ones nobody hired for anymore, the ones that had quietly stopped being roads. Then he sat and looked at it, and after a while he took the lamp closer, because he did not like what it was doing. The dead roads did not go anywhere in particular. That was the point of them, he had always assumed. But drawn together on one sheet, they made a shape, and the shape had a middle, and the middle was about 9 miles of the route expanse that nobody had any reason to walk through, and now nobody could. There was nothing on that ground. He checked it against every map the guild had. No ruin worth robbing, no seam, no water, nothing. Somebody had spent 2 seasons and a great deal of money making sure that nothing stayed unwalked. He showed her in the morning. She held the sheet at arm's length for a long time, and Cale watched her go very still, in the way she went still when a thing turned out to be worse than she had been arguing it was. "Can you get me a copy of this?" she said. "That is the copy." She folded it and put it inside her coat. 9 days, she said. "If I am not back in 9 days, I am not late. Nobody has ever gone looking for a scout and been useful. I know." "You don't, but you will." She pulled the strap over her shoulder. "Stay on the boards, take small work. Do not go east of the second gate while I am gone, and do not put any of this in front of the guild until I am standing next to you." "Alindra," she stopped. There were about 9 things he could have said, and 8 of them would have ended with a healer telling somebody quietly that the surveyor had taken a knock to the head. "Watch the walls," he said. She gave him a look he could not read at all. "Yes," she said, "the ground lies." And she went out through the second gate on her own, with his drawing inside her coat, at about 8 in the morning. He counted the days. He was not proud of it. He took small work. He sat in the guild hall and redrew 2 old survey sheets for the clerk with the ink on her fingers, and she paid him properly for them, and on the 4th day she told him his rib was healing, crooked because he would not sleep sitting up. He worked, he ate, he slept badly. On the 6th day a porter came into the hall looking for him by name. They had never met. Cale knew him anyway. The man carried water up to the forward camp, and would still be carrying it in 6 years. And in all that time, he had never once had a reason to speak to Cale. He was carrying something wrapped in cloth, and he put it on the counter with the particular care of a man handling a thing he wished somebody else had brought. "You're the surveyor, the one who works with the scout." "Yes." "There's a crew came in off the eastern ground last night, and they've been in the drink since, and they're saying things." He put a hand flat on the cloth. "Then, this got left at the camp for you. Not for the board, for you." Cale unwrapped it. It was an arrow, snapped in 2 below the head, and there was blood dried down the length of the shaft, and about a hand's width above the break, there were 3 short strokes, burned into the wood. "Who left it?" "Don't know. It was on the crate outside the water store this morning, with your name on the cloth." "My name? Written how?" The porter looked at him. "In letters." Cale made himself stop. "The crew that came in off the eastern ground," he said. "How many?" 8 or 9 of them. I didn't count." "Was there a man with a shaved head? Scar down the side of his face, here." "That's the one buying," said the porter. And then, because he was not a stupid man and had been watching Cale's face while he answered, he added, "Son, I've carried water for 11 years. I don't know anything. Somebody handed me a bundle and told me who it was for. Which was true. Cale could see that it was true. That was the first thing about it that was wrong. He did the sensible thing first, and he did all of it, and it took him most of the day. He went to the guild. He stood at the long counter and told a clerk who was not his clerk that a scout of the forward expedition had gone east 6 days ago, and that an arrow with her mark on it had been left at a water store with his name on the cloth. The man asked how long she had been gone. Cale said 6 days. Scouts are gone 9, 12, 15, the man said. That's the job. Somebody left me her arrow. Somebody left you an arrow. It's a road. Things get dropped on it. The clerk had already begun writing something else. Is she overdue? No. Then there's nothing to file. He went to the guard post at the second gate. 2 bored men, the same 2, who told him that they did not go east of the gate, that nobody went east of the gate, and that if he wanted armed men to walk 9 miles into the expanse on the strength of a broken arrow, he should bring a name, a body, or a witness, and preferably 2 of the 3. He went back to his own clerk, the one with the ink on her fingers, because she was the only person in Root Plaza who had ever put money on him being right. She listened to the whole of it without interrupting once. "What have you got that I can show somebody?" she said. And there it was again. He had the arithmetic. He had the 4 dead roads and the shape they made, and the 9 miles of nothing in the middle of it. And he had drawn it out on the good paper by lamplight, and the one copy of it in the world was folded inside the coat of a woman 9 miles east. He could draw it again. It would be a drawing a surveyor made, of ground he had never been on, proving that some roads have fallen out of use. "Nothing," he said. "No," she agreed. "That's what I thought." He sat with it until the lamps went on. It was a trap. He was fairly sure of that by the middle of the afternoon and completely sure by dark. And he could have listed the reasons on his fingers. A crew who had taken a scout of the forward expedition would not send her arrow to a surveyor. They would put it in the ground and never speak about it again for the rest of their lives. She was not overdue. She had told him to his face, at the gate, that she would not be back for 9 days, and it had been 6. And the man they had used was a water porter with 11 years on the route and nothing at stake, which is exactly the man you use when you want a thing believed. There was a 4th one, and it was the one he kept coming back to. Nobody had told him where. There was no place named on the cloth, no directions, no hour, nothing to walk towards, and it had not mattered for a second, because Cale knew precisely where she had gone, since he was the one who had drawn it and put it in her hands. Whoever set this knew that he knew, which meant they had been listening for a good while. So he understood it. He had read it correctly, all of it, the way he had read a wall of boxes and a floor of ruin and a hall on the 40th with 24 people standing in it. And it did not help him at all because of the one thing he could not do. He could not check. There was no way in that entire world to find out where a scout was. There was no message he could send and nobody he could ask. She was 9 miles inside a stretch of ground that had been made empty on purpose, on her own, because he had drawn her a picture and she had believed it. If he stayed in Root Plaza and he was right, he lost nothing. If he stayed in Root Plaza and he was wrong, then Alindra was somewhere in the middle of his drawing with an arrow already gone out of her quiver, and she was there because of him. And she would die there over the next few days while he sat in a lamp-lit hall being correct. He had been certain once before. He had stood in this plaza on his first morning, completely certain that he had been chosen, and 11 hours later, he was face down and naked on a dead road. He had been certain on the 40th floor too. He had read the wall nobody could read, and he had been right about every word of it, and everyone he loved was dead inside one breath anyway. Being right had never once saved anybody. That was the whole of it. It was not courage, and he never mistook it for courage. He simply could not make himself gamble her life on his own judgment, having watched exactly what his judgment was worth. He did not go straight out of the gate, and he was not quiet about going. He spent the evening at the clerk's counter with the good paper, and he drew the whole thing again from memory. The 4 dead roads, the corrected northern line, the eastern markers with the dates on them, the 9 miles in the middle. Then he wrote the arithmetic underneath it in a small square hand. What a marker costs to cut, dress, haul, and set. How many they had moved. How many days of 4 men's time that was. What a strip porter is worth on the other side of it. He wrote the difference at the bottom and drew a line under it. Then he folded it and put it on the counter. "If I'm not back," he said, "put that in front of the guild, not a person. The guild in the hall where there are other people standing about." The clerk did not pick it up. "Where are you going?" "East of the second gate." "You know what that sounds like." "I do." She looked at him for a while. Then she took the sheet and put it somewhere under the counter, and Cale heard her put it somewhere with a lid. "I'll want it back off you," she said. "That's fair." He bought the same short surveyor's knife from the same stall because his had been turned out of his hand on a road 2 hours north, and he had never gone back for it. He filled a water skin at the public tap. He took no lamp because a lamp 9 miles into empty ground is a man announcing himself, and he took nothing he would have to put down in a hurry. Then he walked out through the second gate about an hour before first light, and the guard post did not stop him because nobody east of the gate is anybody's business. He was careful the whole way, and none of it was wasted, and none of it mattered. He walked to the edges. He kept broken ground at his back where the road opened out. He stopped 4 times and sat still for a quarter of an hour and listened to the expanse doing what it does. And twice he went a long way round rather than cross flat open stone. It took him most of the day. His ribs stopped complaining at about the 3rd mile and started again at the 7th, and he made himself keep the pace slow anyway, because arriving early and out of breath is arriving twice. He came into the middle of it in the last of the light. He had drawn this place. He had never stood in it. 4 dead roads came in from 4 directions across a wide floor of cracked stone, and where they met, the ground dropped into an old watercourse with nothing in it, and the whole of it was as quiet as the inside of a cupboard. It was exactly as he had drawn it. That was the thing he had not been ready for. He had put this on paper by lamplight 8 days ago, and here it was, in the correct proportions, waiting. There were men on the far side of the watercourse. He counted them the way he counted everything, without meaning to, and stopped counting at 14 because there were more coming up out of the cut, and it had stopped being a useful number. They were not hidden. Not one of them was hidden. They were sitting on the stones with their gear on the ground beside them, the way men sit when they have been somewhere a long time and have got comfortable. And when Cale came out onto the open floor, several of them stood up without any particular hurry. The scarred man came out to the edge of the watercourse with his left arm strapped flat against his chest. He looked genuinely pleased. "There he is," he said. Cale did not answer him. Nobody came for him. One of them pulled the bag off his shoulder, went through it, found the water skin and drank some of it, and handed the bag back. After that, not one of them touched him. They did not search him either. He still had the short surveyor's knife in his belt under the tunic, and out of 14 men on that stone, nobody thought it was worth taking off him. Then they went back to what they had been doing, which was waiting. He had walked out onto that stone ready for it to start, and it did not start. Somebody was eating. 2 of them had a fire going in the bottom of the watercourse where the wind could not reach it, and there was a ring of old ash round it. They had been out here more than a day. They had brought food for it. "Where is she?" Cale said. The scarred man turned round. "Who?" "The scout." "Ah." He worked it out and lost interest in it in the same second. "No, she's not here." "Is she alive?" "I have no idea." He was telling the truth, and he did not care that he was. He had already turned away and was saying something to the man with the fire. That was all Cale ever got. She had not been taken. She was the thing you put on a road to make a man walk down it, and he had walked down it. And now nobody there was going to think about her again. There was one man sitting apart from the rest, up on the dry side of the cut, on a folded coat. He was not crew. Cale could see that from 30 feet. His boots were clean, not new. Clean, the way boots are on a man who walks on floors. He was past 50, tidy, carrying no weapon that Cale could see, and he was waiting the way you wait for a meeting to finish so you can go home. And the scarred man kept checking on him, every minute or so, without seeming to, the way a man checks whether his employer is satisfied. So the crew had not come out here for Cale and waited a day for him to walk in. They had been out here already with that man. The arrow had been timed to bring Cale to them. "Sit down," the scarred man said. "You'll want to be sitting." Cale stayed on his feet. "Suit yourself." He came out onto the stone and stopped 6 feet short. 3 feet is the distance you keep from a man who might still do something. On the North Road, you told me my own business, what it costs me, what I get for it, and that the two don't meet. He said it without any feeling at all, which they don't. And you said somebody pays me to keep those roads dead, which they do. I know. So who told you? Nobody told me. Try again. Nobody told me. I read the board and I walked the roads and I did the sum. In 2 days. Yes. The scarred man looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded at the two men standing behind him. Kale was already moving. He had been watching that man's hands for a quarter of an hour, and he had chosen where to stand when he walked in, the shallow side of the cut on his right, so that anyone coming at him from that side had to come uphill to do it. The first one came uphill. Kale put the heel of his hand into his throat and took his legs out from under him on the slope, and the man went down hard and did not get straight back up. That was one. The second got a fist in the front of his tunic. Kale got the knife out. He did not stab him. He had learned that on the North Road. A knife in a weak hand is a gift to whoever takes it off you. He cut once, hard, across the inside of the forearm that was holding him, and the man let go and stepped back, swearing. That bought him about 4 seconds and a piece of open ground, and he spent both getting his back against the bank because it was the last thing he knew how to do. It was not enough. It had not been enough on the North Road either, and the North Road had been 4 men wide. 3 of them came in together. One caught the knife arm and turned it until his fingers opened. One took his legs. He went down on the stone under all of it, and the whole of it, from the nod to the ground, took about 10 seconds. Nobody was angry about it. The man with the cut forearm stood looking at it and complaining, the way you complain about a splinter. 2 others went to pick up the one Kale had put down the slope, and somebody laughed, not cruelly, which was worse. Then they started hitting him. It went in rounds, and every round was the same. They would stop and put him back up on his knees for it, because you cannot ask a man a question while he is face down. The scarred man would ask it again, in the same flat voice he had used the first time. Kale would say nobody. Then they would start again. By the 3rd round, they had to hold him there to keep him up. By the 5th, he could not see out of his left eye. Sometime after that, his breath stopped coming all the way in, and he found he could not answer straight away anymore. He had to wait until he had enough air to say the word with. Nobody was angry. In the middle of it, one of them asked another one whether there was any water left. The shadow of the West Bank moved across the floor of the cut and reached his hands. The trouble was that both of his answers were true, and neither of them could be said out loud. He had worked it out over 6 years of checking markers for a living, and those 6 years had been taken off the world like a page off a pad. And he had told nobody, not the healer, not the elf, not one person in either world, because he had decided in a medical tent 3 weeks ago that he never could. So he said the second one, nobody, I told nobody. He must have said it 40 times, and it sounded worse every time, because men do not know things on their own, and every man standing over him knew it. Somewhere in there he worked out that he could stop it. He could give them a name, any name. There were 400 people at that porter board, and he could picture a dozen of their faces, and one word would end this, and the scarred man would take his crew and walk the 9 miles home. He got as far as opening his mouth. That was the 2nd time in his life. Then he thought about what a name actually was. It was a person, in a room in Root Plaza, who would open their own door in 3 days to men who did this for a living. He shut his mouth and kept it shut. It cost him the rest of the afternoon. Then the man on the bank spoke for the first time. He came out of the guild hall, he said. Find out who he talks to in there. His voice was perfectly ordinary. He did not look at Kale while he said it, and he did not look at him afterwards. And Kale, with his cheek on the stone, understood what he had done. He had sat at a counter for an evening drawing 4 dead roads on good paper. He had written the sum underneath. He had folded it and put it into the hands of a woman with ink on 3 fingers, and told her to carry it into the guild hall if he did not come back. And she had put it in a box and said she would want it back off him. It had not once occurred to him what that might cost her. He tried to say something. He was not sure afterwards what it would have been, that she had never read it, that she knew nothing, that the drawing was his and the hand was his. It did not come out as words. The man came down off the bank near the end. He crouched carefully, the way a man past 50 crouches, and he looked at Kale for a while, with nothing on his face at all. Kale looked back and got a long, clear view of him, gray coming in at the temples. an old scar through one eyebrow, a completely ordinary face, and one he had never once seen in 6 years of Root Plaza. "He's telling the truth," the man said. "He hasn't told anybody. Nobody works alone." "He does." He straightened up. "That's the part you should be worried about." Then he looked over at the man with the cut forearm, and his face changed into something almost kind. "Get that seen to properly when you're back in. Not by one of this lot, by somebody who knows what they're doing. Cuts go bad out here." The man said he would. "Do you want him finished?" "No. Out here he's nothing. Put a knife in him and he's a report." He was already walking back up the bank. "We're losing the light." He never spoke to Kale. Not once in the whole of it. The scarred man went through his things last and did not find what he had come for. "Where's the coat?" Kale did not answer him. It was folded in canvas at the bottom of a chest in a rented room in Root Plaza. 4 days paid on it, and nobody in the world knew that except him. The scarred man dropped the bag on the stone. "There's a man 3 districts over would have paid for that. I told you so myself, on the road." He got up and told the others they were going. They kicked the fire out and went. They talked the whole way. Somebody was still complaining about his boots. Kale tried to get up twice. The first time he made it onto one elbow, the second time he did not get that far. And after that, he stopped because he could feel what was wrong with him. And it was not something a man walks 9 miles on. Something in his side had given way and was filling up. His arms did what he asked them to. His legs did not. He was very cold, and it was not a cold night. So he did the arithmetic on it because it was the last thing he was any good at, and it was not complicated. 9 miles of broken ground in the dark, on legs that would not answer. Nobody goes east of the second gate. The 2 guards had told him so to his face that morning, and the one person in Root Plaza who knew where he had gone would not begin to wonder about him for 4 or 5 days. He was not going to be found. He had known that at the gate an hour before first light, and he had walked out through it anyway. Nothing came for him either. He lay there waiting for the ground to shift and something to come up out of it, and the ground stayed exactly where it was. Even out here, he was not worth the walk. So, he had time, and he was awake for most of it, and he did the only thing he had ever been good at. He went back down the line. He had refused them at the board and given them nothing, and that had been right. Then he had opened his mouth on a dead road to hear himself say one true thing out loud. Then he had drawn the roads because he wanted to be the man who saw it and put the drawing in her hands. Then he had known this was a trap and come anyway. One correct decision at a time. That part was his. The hands were theirs, and Alindra was somewhere. 4 days north or 9 miles east, or sitting by a fire with his drawing folded inside her coat. He had come out here for her, and he was never going to find out which. The light went out of the sky above the watercourse. In 6 years, there was going to be an expedition to the 40th floor, and every one of them was alive at that moment. Aaron checking a strap somewhere, Marin with his hand flat on a chained book, Torin checking a blade for the 3rd time, Lyra counting bandages onto a shelf in a tent full of lamps. And the only man in the world who knew what was waiting up there was going out on a piece of cracked stone in an empty place, with nobody standing over him. On his first morning back, he had stood in the plaza with one mark on a page that had been blank his whole life, and he had refused to finish the thought. One death, one mark. One of anything is not a pattern. He had decided to treat himself as a man with one life, because the last time he let himself believe he was special, 4 men took his clothes and left him on a road. He let himself want it now. There was nothing left to be careful with, not the dying. There was nothing in the dying that any part of him wanted. He was frightened all the way through, and he had been frightened for hours, and everything in him was still trying to get up off that stone and go home. Whatever else was true, this hurt, and it had hurt for a long time, and he would have given anything at all not to be doing it. The morning. He wanted the morning, because if he opened his eyes on that stone one more time, 20 years old, whole with his mother's jacket back on his shoulders, then there was a man somewhere in Root Plaza with clean boots and a scar through one eyebrow, going quietly about his business, who had never heard of Kale. He had no idea whether he was going to get it. One mark was not a promise, and he knew better than anybody what happens to a man who decides he is owed a story. He wanted it anyway. After that, it came apart slowly. The far side of the watercourse stopped being a shape and turned into a smear. He could hear himself breathing, and it sounded a long way off. The cold came up out of the stone into him, and then it stopped being cold. He was not frightened. He noticed that, and then he stopped noticing things. His eyes closed. Then the dark. Not the dark of a night, the dark of a place where light had never existed. And out of the middle of his own chest, quiet, in no hurry at all, until the answer is found, death will not release you. His eyes opened. Stone under his hands, wind. 100 voices, wheels on cobble, the roar of a city that had no idea he had ever died. Root Plaza. 20 years old, body whole. Kale did not check himself this time. He did not shake, and he did not sit down. He got up and started walking towards the registration hall because he wanted to see the page. Root Plaza went past him the way it always went past him. The porter with the crooked load. The 2 guards arguing at the foot of the steps about whose turn it was. The charm merchant leaning out over his crates, drawing breath to start a speech. Kale could have recited backwards. And Kale was already past him before the first word landed. The first time he woke on that stone, he had sat down against a wall and shaken for a quarter of an hour. The second time, he had spent 10 minutes pulling his own shirt up, looking for scars that were not there. This time, he did not break stride. Yesterday, he had been face down on cracked stone 9 miles east of the second gate, waiting to die in a place nobody would ever walk. Not one of them knew. Not one of them ever would. He wanted the orb. He wanted to put his hand on it and look at the blank place inside it, where the shape of a man was supposed to be written, and count what was in there. Everything else could wait. The queue took 40 minutes. He stood in it with his hands in his pockets and did not talk to anybody. Then the orb, and the cold surface of it under his palm, and the flat voice of a man who had said the same 6 words 11,000 times. Ash rank, low force, average sense, low channel, stable will. Kale was not listening, and he was watching the stone. The 5 readings turned over under the surface the way they always did, and in the wide blank place where the shape of a man should have been, 2 short lines, cut side by side into a page that had never had anything written on it. The registrar stopped talking. He leaned down over the orb, tilted his head at it, and frowned. "Your thread's empty," he said, "and there's 2 marks on it." "I know. You know." Kale took the tag off the counter before the man had finished stamping it and walked out. 1 death, 1 mark. He had refused to believe that because 1 of anything is not a pattern. 2 deaths, 2 marks. Now it was. Which left the other question. He had died on the 40th floor and woken up on this stone. He had died 9 miles east of the gate and woken up on this stone. Both times a long way from anywhere. Both times here. Does it always put me back here? There was one way to find out, and he did not let himself finish the thought. Instead, he thought about the jacket. He was wearing it. And it was what had killed him. Not the crew. 4 men are just 4 men. The jacket. A weave no tailor in this world could make. On a boy with no rank, standing in the open where anybody could price it. The scarred man had decided in 4 seconds at the porter board, before Kale opened his mouth. He had worked that out last time on a cot with a cracked rib, and by then it was too late. So this time, he did it first. There was a wash stall on the north row with work clothes out on the lines, gray and stiff and identical, and a woman 3 stalls away shouting at somebody about a barrel. Kale took a tunic and a pair of coarse trousers. He was not proud of it, and he would have paid for them if he had owned a single coin. He changed in the gap between 2 tents, and he took off all of it. The jacket, the gray shirt, the jeans, the white and gray shoes that were not shoes. Every stitch on him had been made in a world this one had never heard of, and the scarred man had never once needed to look at his face. He wrapped the lot in the canvas the clothes had been pegged to, pushed the bundle under a loose flag of stone at the base of the plaza wall, and put a chip of red tile on top so he would know the spot. That left him barefoot on cold stone with no money, which was a problem he knew exactly how to solve. It took about 4 minutes. He thought of it as not being robbed a 3rd time. It was the first thing he had ever changed. The porter board was the same scarred wall of nailed notices and chalk. He took the northern wall survey off its nail without reading it. He already knew what it said. The clerk had ink on 3 fingers and did not look up. "That one's cursed," 3 crews have dropped it. They get out there, the markers don't match the sheet, they turn round. I don't pay for turning round. The markers are fine, the map's wrong. He put it down on her counter. The ground under that wall sinks about the width of a hand every few years, and the wall sinks with it. Nobody has ever updated the sheet, so every crew you send out measures the first stretch, gets a number that doesn't match what's written down, decides somebody's been turning markers on them, and comes home. She looked up. Pay me half now, and I'll bring it back redrawn. A survey nobody can finish is worth nothing to you. A survey with the right numbers on it, you can sell to every crew that goes north for the next 10 years. And then, because the board was right there in front of him, and he could not help it, your Eastern Hall's been posted 4 times at 4 different rates. Nobody chops a job up like that unless nobody will take it whole. So, something happened out on that route and nobody wrote it down. He nodded at the middle of the wall. Your second gate notice is chalked over an older one, and whoever did it didn't wipe the old one off properly. 2 rates for the same work, 3 days apart. That difference is going into somebody's pocket, and they're standing close enough to your counter to do it. And at the bottom, and that's the 3rd week of the season. Nothing should have come down at the foot of the expanse yet. Somebody's calling it rubble because writing down what actually happened would mean saying it out loud on a public board. The hall around them stayed loud. It went very quiet at that counter. The clerk put her pen down. How long have you been on the board? First day. She looked at him for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she counted coins into his hand, which she did not do for first days, and wrote his name in the back of her ledger, in the part where she kept the people worth calling back. He was at the supply row when the crew came past. 4 of them. Lean men with easy smiles that came from practice rather than warmth, and the one in front with a shaved head and a scar running from his ear to his jaw. Cale did not move and did not look down. He had spent a long time learning that looking away is a thing people notice. The scarred man's eyes went over him the way a man's eyes go over a wall. Gray tunic, ash tag, nothing. And he kept walking, still talking to the man beside him, and the 4 of them went off down the row. Cale stood there with his heart going. That man had killed him, 9 miles east of the gate, on cracked stone, over most of an afternoon. And he had just walked past, because a boy in a gray tunic is not worth turning your head for. He bought boots first. Heavy, second-hand, half a size too big, and the first thing he had ever bought with money he had earned in this world. Then bread and dried meat, a water skin, and a short surveyor's knife. And he walked out through the north gate, and nobody in Root Plaza had looked at him once all morning. It was the best he had ever felt in this world, and it lasted about 4 hours. The old northern wall was 2 hours out along the edge of the Root expanse, and there was nothing living on it. That was why nobody wanted the job. It was also why he had taken it. He walked the line properly. First marker, measure to the second, write down a number 9 feet short of what the map said, go on to the next one. It took him a day and a half. By the second afternoon, he had 4 miles of corrected line in a neat hand, and the map rolled up inside his shirt. And the whole walk back, the question would not leave him alone. Does it always put me back here? Because if it did, he could stop being careful. And if it didn't, then every single thing he did from now on was the last time he was ever going to do it. So he stopped at the fracture. It ran between the 3rd marker and the 4th, and it was the entire reason the map was wrong. The ground under the wall had split, and it had been settling for longer than anybody had bothered to check. From 20 feet off, it looked like a shadow lying on the stone. Up close, it was a gap he could have stepped into sideways, and the walls of it went down out of the light. He had thought about the knife and put it away almost at once. He had already done slow. He had lain 9 miles east of the gate for most of a night with something in his side filling up. And by the end of it, he had wanted the morning so badly there was nothing else left in him. Whatever he did was going to take no time at all. Cale dropped a chip of stone over the edge and waited. He did not hear it land. He stood with the toes of his boots over it. It would be quick, 2 seconds of an afternoon, and then the plaza, and then he would know. And his legs would not do it. He stood there a long time trying to make them. He told himself he had done harder things. He told himself that a man who had already died twice was not killing himself. He was checking a number. And underneath all of it, small and steady and completely unanswerable. What if it doesn't work? 2 was not always, 2 was twice. And if he was wrong, there was no plaza and no morning. There was just the dark, and nothing coming after it, and nobody in either world who would ever know he had existed. He was not brave. He had never once been brave. Kale stepped back from the edge and kept walking, with 4 miles of good work rolled up inside his shirt and his hands shaking, ashamed of himself in a way he could not have explained to anybody. He was still telling himself he would do it tomorrow. Tomorrow was his whole religion. It always had been. He heard it a mile from the gate. Not a roar, a sound like a building settling, long and low and far too big for the road it was on. Kale came round a shoulder of collapsed stone and stopped. It was standing in the middle of the route with its back to him, and it was the size of the wall beside it. Black, wet-looking in the flat gray light. Nothing on floor 1 was that shape. Nothing on floor 1 was that big. He had crossed 39 floors. He had never seen this. It turned its head. It looked straight at him, and it did not care. Then it moved, stone in front of his face, very close, at an angle that made no sense. 8 or 9 feet away, a body in a gray tunic went down onto its knees, and then over sideways, and it was wearing his boots. No pain, no time to be frightened in. He had stood at that fracture for 20 minutes and could not make himself take one step. It took the world half a second, and it was not even paying attention. Then the dark. Until the answer is found, death will not release you. His eyes opened. No wind, no wheels on cobble, no 100 voices. Canvas, close on both sides. Dirt under his hands instead of stone, the smell of wet linen and lye. Kale sat up in the gap between 2 tents on the north row. He was already wearing the gray tunic. His hands went to the front of it and found stiff, cheap cloth and no jacket underneath. He got up. He went along to the base of the plaza wall and put his hand under the loose flag of stone. The bundle was there. The chip of red tile was sitting on top of it, exactly where he had left it. 4 minutes away, Root Plaza went on roaring about its morning. He had woken up on that stone every single time he had ever died. He had not woken up on it this time. He did not move for a while. He sat in the dirt between the 2 tents with his back against the canvas and both hands flat on the ground, and the ground was the wrong ground. Twice he had opened his eyes on the plaza stone. Both times had been the worst moment of his life, and both times had been the same. The stone, the wind, 100 voices. He had come to hate it. He had also, without ever once admitting it, come to hold on to it. Whatever happened to him, however it went, he knew where he would be standing afterwards. It was the only fixed thing he had. And it had moved. He got up too fast and had to put a hand on the tent pole. Because if it could move 4 minutes, it could move 4 miles. It could put him at the bottom of the fracture. It could put him somewhere with no air in it. The world had been setting him down in the same place out of habit, apparently, and now it was doing something else. And there was nobody to ask. And there never would be, about any of it. Ever. He walked to the plaza and stood on the exact spot, like a man checking a door he had already locked. Nothing. It was just ground. And underneath the fear, something worse started. The coins were gone out of his pocket. The map was not inside his shirt. The survey was hanging on its nail on the porter board where he had taken it from. If none of the day had happened, then the road had not happened, and the thing on the road had not happened, and he was a man sitting in the dirt with a story. There was exactly one thing in this world that could tell him otherwise. The queue was shorter at that hour. The registrar looked up, and then looked up properly. You were here this morning. Then what do you want? Read it again. The man waved at the pedestal without much interest. Kale put his hand on the stone. The registrar came up off his stool. He put his face down close to the orb, closer than Kale had ever seen anybody put it, and stayed there. There's 3. I know. There were 2, 4 hours ago. I wrote it on your sheet myself. He looked up. You have been in Root Plaza all morning. Yes, Kale said. I have. He took his hand off the orb and walked out. And behind him, a man who had done the same job for 20 years sat down and did not call the next person forward. So it had happened. Something was still counting. He sat down against the wall and tried to work out what he had done differently. A stolen tunic, a jacket under a stone, a job off a nail, 4 men who did not slow down. 4 miles of corrected map. A fracture he had not stepped into. One of those, or none of them, or all of them together. And the only way to find out was to change one thing, die, and see where he woke up. He already knew he could not make himself do that. He had tried, on an empty road, and stood there until his legs shook. So he left it, and went to find something he could actually use. Because there was one. Whatever had been standing on the North Road was standing on it today. It had not gone anywhere. The world had gone back to this morning and taken the whole day with it. And somewhere out past the gate, a thing the size of a wall was doing whatever it had been doing before Kale walked round the corner into it. He was the only person alive who knew that. And the Northern Line was a working route. The guild had 4 postings on it this week, and 3 of them were the bad-paying kind that go to men with no rank and no crew, because nobody else will take them. He had been one of those men yesterday. Then there was the other thing, and it was worse. Floor 1 was a ruin with small things that came up out of the cracks. He had run from those on his first day in this world. This was off the deep floors, standing on the easiest ground in the tower, in daylight, a mile from a gate with 2 bored men in it. Things do not come down. In 6 years, he had never once heard of it happening, and he had spent those 6 years listening to people who would have known. Kale got up and went out through the north gate. He did not go looking for the thing itself. He went looking for the ground it had walked over. The first mark was 400 paces out. A shallow scoop torn out of the shoulder of the road, and the broken edge of it was still pale. Stone that has been open a while goes gray. This had happened yesterday. He crouched over it a while. Then he stood up and started walking away from the gate, back along the direction the damage was coming from. It was slow. The thing did not leave footprints. It left wreckage, and one piece of wreckage tells you nothing at all. You need a lot of them before they line up and point somewhere. So he collected them one at a time the whole afternoon until he had 11. Then he stood on a rise and looked back at the line they made. It ran east, not east towards the second gate, where the working roads and the carts and the crews were. East across the empty ground south of it, over 4 roads the guild had quietly stopped posting jobs for, because porters kept getting robbed on them, and nobody would take the work anymore. Kale knew those 4 roads. In another life, he had spent an evening drawing them onto one sheet of paper by lamplight, and he remembered exactly what they had looked like together. They made a ring, and inside the ring was about 9 miles of the route expanse that nobody had set foot on in 2 years. There was nothing on that ground. No ruin worth robbing, no water, no seam, nothing anybody would want. Somebody had spent 2 seasons and a great deal of money making sure it stayed empty. And something the size of a wall had just walked out of the middle of it. Kale could not take that to the guild. He was an ash rank nobody 2 days off the registration line, and they would not let him pass the counter. He needed somebody they had to listen to. She came through the eastern second gate a little after first light, the way she did. Kale had been waiting since dark. He had one chance at this, and he had spent most of the night deciding what the first sentence would be. "There's a crew turning route markers on the eastern roads," he said as she went past. "You've been chasing them a year. You've stood in front of the guild about it 4 times, and every time they've told you it's robbery." Alindra stopped. She looked at him for about 2 seconds. The gray tunic, the ash tag, a face that had been out in the cold a while. "Who told you that?" "Nobody." "Then say something I can use or get out of my gate." "It isn't robbery." Kale kept his voice flat and ordinary because the moment it went up, she would put him with everybody else who had ever wanted something from her. "And you'll never prove it is, because it isn't. Stop arguing about what they are. Start counting what they spend. And no, go on. A route marker is cut stone, quarried, shaped, carted out, and 2 men most of a day to set one properly. That crew has turned 40 of them in 2 seasons. He held up a hand. "And what do they take off it?" "A coat, somebody's boots. On a good day, a purse with a week's wages in it. 40 markers against 40 coats. It isn't close, and it never has been. They lose money every single time they do it, which means somebody else is paying them to keep those roads dead, and has been for 2 years. The gate traffic went round them both. Alindra did not say anything for a while. "How long have you been on the boards?" 2 days. Her hand went still on the strap of her quiver. "Say that again." 2 days. I registered the morning before last." She looked at him a long moment. "What's your name?" "Kale." Alindra, walk with me. If half of that holds up on the ground, I'll take it into the hall myself. And they went out through the gate together. It was a small thing in the end, and he did it because she had been decent to him. They had stopped to eat in the lee of a broken wall. She asked him, without much interest, how a man 2 days off the registration line knew what the base stone of a marker was supposed to look like. And Kale looked at her, alive, 20 feet away, eating bread, with 6 years of dying on the 40th floor ahead of her that she knew nothing about. And he was so tired of being the only one who knew anything that he opened his mouth and started to say it. I've done this before, all of it. The world stopped. Not for her. He worked that out afterwards, for him. The wind stopped. The grit stopped moving on the stone. Her hand halted halfway to her mouth, with the bread still in it. And he felt it come for him, and something closed around his heart. Not on his chest, inside it. A grip, unhurried and enormously strong. The way a hand closes on a bird. He could feel the size of it. He could feel it deciding. It squeezed once and let go. Then the wind came back and the grip moved and her hand finished going to her mouth. And Kale was down on his hands and knees on the stone, coughing, eyes streaming. He knew exactly what had just happened to him. That was the worst of it. There was nothing confusing about it at all. Slowly, Alindra had not moved. It's gone down the wrong way. It took him about a minute. She waited it out, and by the end of it, she had nearly decided it was funny. You want to chew that? She said. Then, you were saying something. I was. Well? And that was the thing he did not know yet. Whether it had been the words at all. He had been talking to her all afternoon and nothing had touched him. It could have been the bread. It could have been anything. So he said it again. There's an expedition. In 6 years it's going to... This time it did not squeeze once and let go. It closed, and it kept closing, and there was no air anywhere in the world. He was on his side on the stone, and he could feel every separate part of it. Slow, deliberate, in no hurry whatsoever, and with no intention of stopping until he did. It let go the moment he stopped trying to speak. He lay there breathing. Same sentence, twice. Now he knew. Alindra was standing over him, not crouched, standing. She had nearly laughed the first time. She was not doing that now, because there was nothing in his hand, and he had not been eating, and he had not been doing one single thing except opening his mouth. He got up onto one elbow, and he could see her working it out. 2 days on the boards, knew things he had no way of knowing. Went down twice on an empty road 9 miles from anybody, having asked her to come out onto it with him. What is it? She said. Say the thing. Kale did not open his mouth. He could have said, I don't know. 2 words, and she might have stayed. But he had just found out exactly what he was and was not permitted to do, and he was not going to lie to the only person in the world who had listened to him. Never mind, he said. She waited longer than he expected her to. You're not well, she said. It was not unkind. Go back in. Take the arithmetic to the guild and put it on a counter. It's good, and it should be in front of somebody who isn't me. I'll come with you. No. She pulled the strap over her shoulder and looked out east, at the ground he had spent all afternoon pointing her at. I'm going to go and see what's out there, she said. Somebody has to, and it isn't going to be a boy who can't finish a sentence. Then she went on her own. He watched her go until the road bent, and then he stood there a while longer. She was walking east because he had told her to. He had spent all night working out the sentence that would make her take it seriously, and it had worked. And now she was going out to the one place in the world he could not tell her anything about. He could not even shout after her. He had tested that twice this afternoon. So he did what she said. The guild hall was loud and warm and full of people who had never seen him before. He took a sheet of the good paper off the clerk's counter without asking, sat down at the end of it, and found out something useful in about a minute. He could write it, not all of it. When he put the nib down to start a line about 6 years from now, his hand stopped over the page and stayed there, and he did not push it. But the 11 marks on the northern road, and the direction they ran, and the 4 dead roots and the shape they made, all of that came out of him and onto the paper without anything at all happening. Because none of it was from before. He had walked that ground today, with his own legs. It was just a survey. So he drew it exactly like one. The corrected northern line, the 11 points of damage with distances, the 4 routes the guild had stopped posting, the ring they made, and the 9 miles inside it. At the bottom, he wrote one sentence, and he chose every word of it. Something came out of the middle of this ground within the last 2 days, and it is larger than anything recorded on floor 1. Then he put it on the counter. The clerk had ink on 3 fingers and did not look up. Surveys go in the box. It isn't a survey, it's a request for one. They go in the box as well. Your second gate notice is chalked over an older one, Kale said. 2 rates for the same work, 3 days apart. She looked up. She read the whole sheet standing, which took her a while. Then she set it down and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Nobody is going to walk 9 miles on a first day's paper. You understand that. This sits in a box until somebody with a rank asks for it, and that could be a season. Then don't put it in the box, Kale said. There's a scout on the eastern line called Alindra. When she comes back in, put it in her hand. He got as far as the gate before he turned round and bought food for 2 days. Because a season was not the problem. Alindra coming back in was the problem. She was already out there, and she had gone to look at the ground. And the thing that had taken his head off, a mile from the north gate, had come out of the middle of it. He was not going to be able to warn her. He was not going to be able to explain. He could not even be certain she would live long enough to read a piece of paper. But he could go and look, and come back knowing, and looking was the only thing he had ever been any good at. He went out through the second gate an hour before dark. He found it on the second afternoon, and he found it by the smell. Smoke first, then meat, and something under the meat that was much worse. And Kale went flat behind a shelf of broken stone, and did not move for a long time. Then he went in the way he knew how. He had crossed the 40th floor with his head down, and his eyes on his own boots, in a line of the best climbers alive. And the only reason any of them had lived to reach the far wall was that a porter had understood the one instruction that mattered. Be nothing, and it lets you pass. He had never used it since. He used it now. It took him 3 hours to cross 400 paces. The watercourse opened out at the middle of the ring into a wide floor of cracked stone, and they had built on it. Not a camp, a works. 2 long pens of iron stakes driven into the rock. A winch. Cut timber that had been carted 9 miles across ground nobody was allowed to walk. 40 men, maybe more, and none of them hurrying, because they had been here a long time and nobody had ever come. At the low end, where the cut went deepest, they had dug a pit and roofed it with iron bars, and on the far side of the floor there were carcasses. 6 of them, in a row, opened out and drying on frames. Kale looked at those for a while before he understood what he was seeing, and when he did, his stomach turned over. They were bait. The whole works was built around a lure ground. Then something in the pit moved, and he lay flat on the stone and looked down into it. It was small. That was the first thing. It was about the size of a large dog, and it was black. And it was sitting in the bottom of a pit with an iron collar on its neck, and a chain running from the collar to a stake. And it had the biggest eyes he had ever seen on a living thing. A handler came down the ramp with a pole. The thing came off the floor screaming. It went at him with everything it had, hit the end of the chain, and was dragged back off its feet. And it got up and did it again, and again, until the man had done whatever he had come to do and went back up the ramp. Then it lay down in the dirt and made a sound Kale felt in his chest. He waited a long time. Then he moved along the lip of the pit, above it, into the dark under the overhang, close enough to see it breathing. It stopped. It lifted its head and looked straight up at him. And it did not do what it had done to the man with the pole. It did not come off the floor. It did not pull the chain. It put its head on one side, the way a dog does at a sound it has not heard before, and it stayed like that. Kale did not move. Every other living thing on that floor must have arrived at it the way heat arrives off a fire. 40 men it could feel coming from a long way off, all of them pressing at it, all of them the same. Whatever it got off Kale, it was not that. There was nothing pushing at it at all. He was quiet. It put its head back down in the dirt. It went on watching him. Kale lay in the dark above the pit and made himself think. Black. Wet-looking. Wrong in the same way. He had seen that shape standing in the middle of the North Road at 400 paces, and he had seen it turn its head, and it had been the size of the wall beside it. This one was the size of a dog. He put it together in about 4 seconds. and then he lay there with it, because it was worse than anything he had walked out here expecting. They had not built a trap for a monster. They had built a trap for a mother. They had taken her young and dragged it 9 miles into a ring of dead roads, and then they had gone quiet and waited, and they had killed 6 things and hung them out where the wind would carry it. And she had come down for it. She had come down out of a floor nobody in the world had ever reached, onto the easiest ground in the tower, and she had walked the roads looking, and she had killed a boy on one of them without breaking stride because he had been standing in the way. Everything Kale had spent 2 afternoons working out was the wrong shape. The dead roads were not a robbery, and they were not a cover-up. They were a wall around a snare. She came in the last of the light on the 2nd day, and they knew she was coming a long time before she arrived. A man on the high rock put a horn to his mouth, and the whole work stopped being slow. Kale watched it happen from under the overhang and understood, with a kind of sick admiration, that these were not 4 men on a road. Chains came off winches. The timber was a frame, and the frame took a net, and the net had weight along its edge. Men went to places they had clearly stood in before. Somebody put a torch to the 6 carcasses, and the smoke went up in a column, and the noise she made when she saw it came across the flat stone and moved the water in the bottom of the cut. She came down into the ring at a run, and they had it exactly right. The net took her across the shoulders on the first pass. The winches turned. She went down on her side on the cracked stone with 40 men leaning on ropes, and the sound of it went up off the walls, and she could not get her feet under her. They had done this before. Kale could see that from the way nobody was shouting. They were going to win. Kale went down the wall of the cut on his hands and feet, and nobody saw him, because every man on that floor was looking at the largest thing any of them would ever see. The pit ramp was clear, the stake was iron, and it was set in rock, and he was never going to move it. The collar was a pin. He got down into the pit beside the cub with his hands shaking, and it came up off the floor and stopped. 6 inches away, close enough that he felt the air move. It did not scream at him, and it did not pull the chain. It stood there with its whole body tight, deciding, and whatever it was reading off him, it went on reading. Then it dropped its head, very slightly, and let him in. Kale put his hand on the collar. It let him. He worked the pin out. It took him 3 goes, and then the weight came off the cub's neck, and it went up that ramp like something fired out of a wall, and it went straight across 400 paces of open floor towards the net, screaming into a ring of 40 men who had planned every part of that evening, except this one. And the plan came apart. It came apart in about a minute. The men on the ropes had a beast on the ground in front of them, and a second one behind them, and the second one was small and fast and impossible to hold, and it did not care about any of them. 2 of them let go of the rope, which was the only mistake that mattered. The net went slack on one side. The mother got a shoulder under it. Then she stood up. Kale pressed himself into the rock at the foot of the ramp and did not watch most of what happened after that. And what he did see, he was never able to describe to anybody, and he was never asked. It took her less time than it had taken him to get the pin out. When it was over, there was no noise at all, and Kale was still standing at the bottom of the ramp with the collar pin in his hand. She turned round and saw him. He did not run. His legs did not do anything at all. He knew exactly what she was, and he knew exactly what she did, because he had already watched her do it to him on a road a mile from the north gate. And he was the only person in either world who remembered it. She came across the stone, and the cub got in front of him. It put itself between them, low and small on the cracked rock, and it made a noise up at her that had nothing frightened in it whatsoever. She stopped. They stayed like that a moment. Then the big one lowered her head, and the small one went to her, and Kale was on his knees without deciding to be. The cub came back once. It pushed its head against his chest, hard enough to knock him over, and it licked his face, and then it turned and went, and the 2 of them were gone up the eastern cut and into the dark, and then it hit him. He got about 4 steps before his legs stopped working, and he sat down hard on the cracked stone. Everything he had not let himself feel for the last 2 hours arrived at once. The thing that had taken his head off on the north road had stood 6 feet in front of him and looked at him. 40 men had gone in under a minute. His own hands had been on that collar pin. He was shaking so badly he could not hold on to anything. He tried to get up and could not. Then the edges of it went dark, and Kale went over sideways on the stone and did not know anything else for a long time. There was a hand on his shoulder. Breathing. He's breathing. Get him up. Torchlight. Voices. Boots on stone. A lot of them. And somebody swearing steadily somewhere off to his left at the site of the works. Kale opened his eyes. Alindra was crouched over him with her hand fisted in the front of his tunic. And behind her, coming down the cut in a line with lamps, were more guildmen than he had ever seen in one place. She had his paper in her other hand, folded in 3 and filthy. 2 days, she said. You've been on the boards 2 days. Kale looked past her at the wreckage and the empty net and the pit with the bars torn back. You read it, he said. I read it. She still had hold of his shirt. Can you stand? I think so. Then stand up. And on the way back, you can tell me exactly what happened on this ground. Kale got up.